educator for 30 years, with 14 of those years being at the junior high and high school levels, and the rest being spent teaching and working in university undergraduate or graduate program. And I believe that he will be sharing with us today the online education, university education community, academic community, and alternative assessments that can be practiced both in online and in-person classrooms. So BIL website, BIL webinar series is there to bring in these. It has been initiated a couple of months ago to communicate and bring in resources from around the world to give different participants, different educators around the world, an opportunity to delve into the practices and methodologies of education, both online and in person, uh, in terms of university education, in terms of classroom teaching, pedagogy, and all of these. And this sharing would actually, from learning these from different experts in the field, would actually be a very important for us, especially with the changing times, the changing methodologies that are happening due to the online education. So we of course take this opportunity to learn a lot of um, to understand a lot of these things from Patrick's workshop today. So just a few quick reminders before I hand over the whole thing to Patrick is that, one, we're going to hand out a form, an attendance form, so that there'll be a link every 45 minutes. The link would be reposted for you to fill out so that we know who's participated in the session. And um, we request everyone to come to the session with your names on the screen rather than an alternative names, so that it's easier for us to monitor who's here and who's not. And I would request everyone to keep your mics mute so that there's no interference from the background noise. And of course, if any of you have any questions, you're requested to post it in the chat box. Patrick has said that he would open up opportunities for us to ask questions as participants. But if any of you want to register your questions, you can simply put it in your chat box, and we're going to organize all of these chat box to be seen, questions to be seen by Patrick at a convenient time. So with that, Patrick, I would hand over the whole process to you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sensei, for that excellent introduction. I want to thank Brock University and the BIL for organizing this. I think one of the wonderful things I've been discovering about technology over the last, half a year since we entered this environment with the pandemic. One thing I've discovered that is maybe, a little bit, can add a little bit of illumination to an otherwise dark time that we've been dealing with worldwide, is the fact of, I think, educators and individuals who've discovered the potential of technology to unify us, to unite us, to bring us together. I mean, I often tell people that I kind of consider myself to be a dinosaur that learned how to use the computer. I can still remember when I sent my first email. I can remember a lot of these things. And so technology, I'm not an early adopter of technology, but I think as a teacher, as a parent, as a family member, I've definitely learned to value all of these wonderful online mediums. We're using Zoom here today. Because of the potential to bring us together. And so this is an excellent example, I think, here, this Zoom session we're having together for you in the morning, for me in the afternoon, because it gives us an opportunity to dialogue and to talk and to basically defeat the tyranny of distance, So, I mean, for example, when I mentioned family, I mentioned the fact that I'm a parent. I mean, I can't communicate now with my daughters almost continuously by Zoom, by Line, by all of these wonderful platforms. And I kind of really knew were there, but I didn't use them actively until kind of forced to with the pandemic. So my my topic today, I think, is going to be reflective of what we have learned and what we are still learning about the online medium. I'm going to be presenting, making two presentations. The first one probably will be about 45 minutes to an hour. We'll take some questions, then we'll take a little break, and then I'll go into the second one. First one will deal with this idea of developing a sense of community in the online environment for our students. I have actually given this presentation several times, but I keep changing it. I keep adding to it. I keep, you know, and it's also kind of something that people seem to really want to hear. So I brought it again here, and I've made some changes since the last time I've given it. I keep learning new things and adding them to that presentation. And then the second presentation is going to be on alternative assessment and alternative assessment strategies, kind of with the eye on this online environment that we've kind of been thrust into. A lot of teachers, even at my university in Japan, is often known for its kind of being very technologically savvy. But at my university, and by the way, universities tend to be a little bit traditional in their format of the instructional paradigm. A lot of teachers were suddenly faced with, okay, well, how I kind of get the idea of doing Zoom lectures and I can do all of this, but the issue was, how do I assess? How do I assess people effectively in these environments? How do I find out if my young scholars are learning what I need them to know? And so, you know, I spent a lot of time over the last few months, both as an educator in the classroom and also as the Dean of Academic Affairs, and trying to help lead a faculty into this new world, dealing with this issue of how to effectively assess and also how to effectively determine if students are comfortable with their learning, if they're understanding what you are trying to get across to them, all of these things. So we'll be doing that today. Now let me, and by the way, I'm going to be sharing all of these PDFs that I will give, and any handouts I have, I'll put them in the chat file. I'll also be sending them to BIL to distribute to people. All of my presentations, all of my materials, I consider to be public access. I want people to use them if they find them helpful to improve their teaching environment, their teaching and learning environment. So everything is out there. I don't have any proprietary designs on any of the things that I'm telling you this morning. Okay, so let me share my screen here. And there we go. And I will provide opportunities towards the end of the presentations, both the first one, second one, for questions or comments. But if you have a really burning question, please put it in the chat box or in the chat. And I understand somebody's kind of collecting those for us. And I'll try to address it as I go through the presentation today. Okay. There we go. Okay. So anyway, one of the things that I have always been concerned about as an educator, and actually here, let me do one thing here. I'm going to stop share for a moment. I did promise. By the way, this is being recorded. Okay, so I just want you to understand that. It's going to be recorded so that if anyone was not able to attend, or if there have been an issue with their technology, they will have access to it. I've given BIL approval to do this. Just be aware of that. Okay, so if you don't want your face shown, just realize that as far as the camera and that. But it will be recorded specifically so it can be shared with people who are not able to attend today or might need to leave for a meeting or something. So we just want to make sure that that was available. So that's a little comment I'm making there. There we go. All right. And again, let me share my screen. Okay. So I have been concerned going way back in my career as an educator, and I've been an educator, as was mentioned, well over 30 years. Well over 30 years. It's kind of shocks me sometimes when I think back to that length of time, but because it seems it's gone so quickly. But I started teaching in the 1980s, and I was teaching in an inner city school. And it was a school that even the principal said was in a neighborhood that was neglected. There were gangs, there were teenage pregnancies, there was drug abuse, there was all sorts of issues in the community there. And so I had kids from this community coming to the school. A lot of them felt alienated. They didn't feel like they belonged anywhere. That's why I think the gangs were so popular, because kids wanted to have a sense of belonging. They wanted to belong to something. And I think children especially need this, but I think everybody does, right? We all need to have a sense of belonging, whether it be to a family, to a community, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's incumbent on us to try to build an environment of a community, even in the online courses that we teach. And this can be done. I've seen it done successfully. I've tried to do it myself, I think with some success, modest success at least, that much. And so even way back when I was a high school teacher in Phoenix, Arizona in the 1980s, I tried to look at opportunities and ways to create a sense of belonging for my young scholars. I call them scholars, young students, in my classroom. And I tried different techniques. I'm going to share some things that I think I've used successfully on the online environment. But I think it is important that we give students, whatever the age, whether they be primary, junior high, or high school, or university, or adult learners, a sense of belonging, that they are welcome in that class session, that they're welcome in the course, that people care about them, that the instructor is concerned about their well-being and their academic progress. If a person feels like they belong, if a person feels that people care about them, that people are paying attention to them, that the teacher is really keen on seeing that they succeed, that individual will have a much better chance of succeeding academically, socially, etc. They will. We know this from research. I think all of us can probably anecdotally say the same thing is true. So anyway, it's important. And so I'm going to talk to you about the academic environment, but I also want to talk about connections, and I'd like to talk about my connections to Bangladesh, because actually it goes back quite a ways. I took this picture back in 2008, I think it was. It's a rickshaw traffic jam. I think it was outside of Dhaka University, maybe. One of my favorite pictures. I have been coming to Bangladesh. I've been going to Bangladesh, I should say, since 2005. To do teacher training, to teach courses on creative writing, to do research. Pretty much every year I've been privileged to visit Bangladesh and work there, either with teachers or with students, etc. And so my connection goes back about 15 years for me personally. It goes back even further for my family, because my uncle, who passed away a few years ago, he worked in Dhaka and also, I believe, up in Mimising for a while for basically 30 some years. He went to Bangladesh from the United States right after World War II, and he stayed until at least the mid 70s. And he was a math teacher, a headmaster at one of the schools there. He was a Catholic brother. So when I was growing up and very small, my uncle would write letters from this faraway place called Bangladesh, and he would have pictures he would send me and things. And I just thought it was such a wonderfully romantic sounding place, and his descriptions were beautiful. And so, you know, my family connection actually goes back really to the 1940s for Bangladesh. And when I've gone back there, I've been very happy that on occasion I have run into or been, you know, introduced to maybe an elderly individual who was actually one of my uncle's students or was at the school when he was a headmaster. So my connection to Bangladesh goes way, way back, both individually and also as a member of a family. And I hope it continues on far, far into the future. My abstract for this first presentation is here, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. I just want to point out a couple of phrases, a couple of words that are going to be key here. community, camaraderie, and shared purpose. And I think these are the things that we have to worry about developing when we are teaching, especially in the online environment. Because to be honest, if if students are on our campuses, they're coming to our classrooms, we can kind of build this sense of, togetherness, maybe a little easier. You see them, you talk to them, you say hello. In the online environment, especially, although I think our kids are pretty resilient and they're reaching out and they have all sorts of networks, but every kid is different. When I say kid, I mean university students. To me now they seem like children, as I get older, but they're young adults. I still call them kids and scholars and that. And I think it's easier when they're with us in the classrooms, physically there. We can pay attention to them, kind of, pick up on body language, whether they're feeling okay, whether they're sick, tired, what have you, and get in those little conversations with them to check on how things are going. And they've got maybe a circle of friends. We can see, they're talking to people. They got friends there, okay. But the one thing that came out of my discussions with my own students when they were dealing with the online environment, especially the first semester that we did it in the spring, was that they felt a little bit isolated. Sometimes not a little bit, sometimes a lot isolated. They were at their home, maybe they had family members and this, but they were missing their friends. They were missing the campus. They were missing that connection. And so I think it's important that we figure out ways to reestablish or establish a sense of community, the sense of camaraderie, the sense of shared purpose that we can give them, because I know that if they have that, they're going to succeed. I'm going to share just a little bit about Akita because, well, I'm talking to you from Akita, Japan. I've lived here in Akita, now for a little bit over 7 years, but my connection again to Japan goes way back too. In the 1990s, I was privileged to be an exchange teacher for 2 years in a place called Himeji down to the south. And then I came back to Japan in 2000 and basically spent about 8 years working for a school district as a supervisor and then working for a university. And then I went to the Middle East, and then I was kind of headhunted to come back to Japan. And so I've been here for about 7 years, but my connections to the country and the people go, again, way back. And so I work at Akita International University. It's an interesting place because it's a public university and the medium of instruction is English. And this is rare. Now we have some private universities in Japan that might have English medium programs, but we are a public university, beautiful little university, where everything outside of our French class, Spanish class, and those sorts of classes are taught in English. And it's not just in the classroom. English is basically the lingua franca because we also have, typically when we actually have an open campus, right now, of course, everything's online. We have typically out of our 1,000 students, it's a small campus, 200 to 250 of them will be international students, people from around the world who come to Akita to study. We have a very strong Japanese language program, teaching Japanese language as a second language program for our international students. They're very keen on learning that. So our students come from, these 200 international students come from 200 international partner universities that we have. Why do we have 200 international partner universities? Because our students, our degree-seeking students, have as a requirement for graduation that they spend 1 year, one academic year studying abroad. And so they go to one of our partner institutions, and they're scattered all over the world, literally. North America, we have dozens of partners. Europe, dozens. Africa, we have a few. The Middle East, we have some. We have a lot in Asia, but China, Korea, everywhere. We're trying to open up some in South America right now. And so our students scatter. And they go and they study in all these different countries, and they have to do that for a year, one academic year. Then they transfer back, and then they complete their senior year. We usually send them their third year. which in America we call it the junior year. And then they come back to Akita. Well, because we send everybody out, we also accept an equal number of students coming to our campus. So the lingua franca is English. And even our staff members, you know, people who just work in our offices, you know, most of them actually speak English relatively well because they have to communicate to all of these international students. So it's kind of interesting. We're up here in the north of Japan in a very rural environment, beautiful environment, surrounded by forests, and we use English for classes and for general conversations in the hallways and things. It's a beautiful campus. It's small but beautiful. During the nice weather, we like to get out and maybe have our classes outside when we can. We usually have smaller classes, 18 to 20 kids. It's a nice environment. That's why when they were talking to me about coming back to Japan, I was very happy with my work in the Middle East, but I thought, okay, once I came to the campus and saw it and met the students, met the faculty, I said, yes, I can make a home here. And the area itself is also very beautiful. You know, we have a lot of rain. We have, therefore, a lot of lakes and rivers. We have beautiful falls with, and this is a scene out. We have a lot of very old buildings in the countryside, old hotels, onsens, public buildings. So again, it's gorgeous. And skiing. I love skiing, and they got great skiing up here. So that's something I was very happy to find out about. And we have a seacoast also. So we have this beautiful little, you know, fishing villages along the coast too. So it's nice. It's nice. I'm very happy up here. The one issue we have, though, bears. We have to warn, we're in the middle of a forest, and so we have to kind of warn our young scholars, both those international ones and even Japanese, because a lot of our kids come from Osaka or Tokyo. They're not country kids. They're from the urban environment. So we have to kind of warn them and say, listen, remember, no walking or hiking in the forest by yourself. Do not go out at night. Be cautious. You know, if you see a beautiful, cute little cub, walk away quickly because the mama bear is probably nearby. So we fortunately have not had any incidences on campus, but we, of course, have to always be a little bit vigilant, always remind our students, you know, but they listen and they take care of themselves and each other, and so it's no problem. Okay, so anyway, before spring 2020, our teaching and learning environment was like this. You know, we had small classes, mix of international students in there with Japanese students. We had a lot of cultural events and activities and courses on campus because, of course, you can see a lot of our international students and also the Japanese students like to learn about traditional culture. And so our tea ceremony class is always popular, flower arrangement, everything. The courses fill up immediately whenever we offer them. And we have a lot of field trip opportunities. You know, there are a lot of things to see, a lot of archaeological sites, lots of historical sites around the area. But of course, since spring, this is kind of what our courses have looked like. Everything's been done on Zoom. We had to do that because we needed to protect our students and the teachers and the community. So we moved everything on Zoom, and we decided, because we had to make the decision in July, to continue on Zoom with online education, at least through the fall. And now we're thinking about our winter program. We have a short winter program, but probably we will have to teach our courses again online in that case. So, you know, our young scholars, our students are very resilient. They've been fine. Everybody wants to get together on campus. They're hoping for that opportunity, but they get it. They understand that we have to do this, and they've responded, I think, admirably with this. They've been open to, you know, what we need to do, and they understand it, and I think they fully embrace the online environment. But the old issues of belonging, of connection, of community are still there. This is my agenda. I'm going to share some old school research with you, some local research from the context of my university, And then I'm going to get into some tips and techniques from my own and noted best practice when we talk about online learning and the sense of community. Conclusion, then I'll give you some time for questions and answers, okay? All right, old school research. This is a huge quote, but let me just make it simpler. You probably know Vygotsky. And if you don't be embarrassed by that. Okay, early 20th century psychologist. His ideas are often utilized in education. I've studied them. I do a lot with educational philosophy and that. So anyway, it's something that I pay attention to. But he called this thing, he had this idea of the zone of proximal development. And to him, it was this distance between what a student can understand and achieve by themselves. If you tell a kid, okay, go do it, study this, learn this, and what they can achieve with the support of their instructor and their peers. Okay, so he said, okay, they can do this much, but then they could do this much more if we have the teacher involved and their peers. Peers are key. Vygotsky, and at the time, I mean, when you thought about education in the United States, Europe, other places, it was very teacher-centric, right? And it was this transference of information technique where the teacher lectured, students take notes, and it wasn't really oriented to be student-centric, and it definitely didn't involve the peers. You didn't think about the class helping each other. Although, you know, in our one-room schoolhouses that were out in the countryside, where I grew up, you know, but by the time I was growing up, most of those were closed. They did kind of have this, you know, tutoring idea, the older kids helping the younger ones. But this idea of peers helping each other learn, well, that was something a little bit radical. But Vygotsky said it was important. So when he was talking about, okay, how you're going to develop assignments or things like that, or build this environment in the classroom, he said, faculty must also consider how to integrate peer-to-peer interaction and instructor guidance. Now that's important. The peer-to-peer interaction we'll talk about. And he came up with this thing, well, on his ideas, Garrison came up with it, or at least formalized it. It's called a Community of Inquiry, or COI framework. What does it look like? This is what it looks like. So you have this idea of social presence, of cognitive presence, and teaching presence, all right? And then you see how all of these are engaged together in educational experience. You know, what does a teacher do? Setting climate, supporting discourse, regulating learning, engagement. What are the goals? What's the direction? Engagement with participants. How is the teacher promoting this engagement of the participants with each other and with the instructor? And then the engagement with content. Okay, we have things we have to learn. How is the engagement with the actual content going? All right, so you can see how this kind of works together for this community of inquiry. Again, community is the underlined word when I say this, all right? So a social presence, the idea is that people have to feel that they belong, that it's a trusting environment. I teach languages now primarily, but I also teach, you know, I teach literature courses, I teach some education-oriented courses, things like that. It doesn't matter what the course. If the student does not feel that the environment is such that he can trust that if he or she says something, he or she will not be ridiculed, or whatever they say will be accepted, you know, in a respectful way, then they're not going to engage. And I know I won't mention names, but I remember distinctly when I was growing up. When I was growing up in elementary school and junior high, I had an okay association with mathematics. It wasn't, you know, a subject I was particularly gifted at, but I, you know, it was okay. I didn't have a problem with it. But then I got to high school and I ran into a teacher who, whenever you asked a question, for example, whenever you ask a question, he would look a little frustrated with you, like, why didn't you understand this? I already went through it. And then he would answer the question, but there was always this tinge of like frustration and kind of like he was angry with you. And so, of course, you know, kids, you know, I was 14, 15 years old when I encountered this individual in the classroom. you know, they tend to shut down because, well, you know, you're kind of very shy anyway. I think at that age, a lot of kids, and I was, and so I shut down. I just shut down. I didn't ask any more questions. I never raised my hand. I just, okay, you know, I couldn't say anything because I didn't feel safe doing so, because I felt he was going to ridicule me in front of my peers, and that was just too uncomfortable, which is too bad because I kind of turned off on math because of that. I mean, I went to courses. I had to do them because I was on a college. I wanted to go to college, so I had to take this course, that course, and that course. But I never really got into the learning of it. Didn't enjoy it, and that. It's unfortunate, but you know, it was a small school, and that guy taught two out of the three courses that I had to take. So anyway, so that's important to remember, social presence. Cognitive presence is the extent to which learners are able to construct and confirm meaning. Are they getting things? Do they understand? Can they construct in their own mind how things are connected to each other? Kids will do this in different ways. We know that. Okay, some will do it visually, some will do it through mnemonics, some will do, they will come up with different ways and structures in their thinking to connect things, but they have to connect things. They're not making those little neural networks connecting this idea with this idea, with that idea, with that idea, then whatever you're trying to teach them is going to vanish or just be confusing, okay? And then the teaching presence is key. We often talk about, you know, teachers, about student-centric teaching and that, but the teacher is always important. We cannot just step away completely. I mean, we are always there, maybe as the, you know, hopefully not always the sage on the stage, although occasionally you can get some great lecturers who are funny and interesting and fun, but at least a guide on the side, the facilitator. And, you know, the teacher sets everything up. Think about yourself, maybe, oh, you're a mixture of the director. Think of a stage play. You're the director. You even wrote the script. Okay, so you set everything up, but then the actors themselves bring it to life. And so you set the stage, you write the script, but then the students bring everything to life. All right, but you're vital. You are completely vital. And I know that's scary, but it's important. I think we all get into this career because we want to help people, because we're empathetic, because we're interested in ideas and understanding and all of that. So I think we can handle it, but we need to understand that we are the ones who set the groundwork for all of this. And it's important, it's vital what we do. I want to also talk about this 2x2 matrix. Now, DeSura and Church, all right, created this. And they said that if you look at a typical, they were talking about college course, college classroom, and they talked about the environment. And they said that an environment in a classroom can be implicitly centralizing. It can be explicitly centralizing. It can be implicitly marginalizing. It can be explicitly marginalizing, okay? So what do we mean? If a kid comes into your class and let's say, you know, you greet them when they come in, even the Zoom session, you greet them, you know their name, you say hello, oh, how's it going? They come into the session. That is explicitly centralized, and you're welcoming them to the environment. Okay, they feel like, oh yeah, I belong. If they have people in the class when they get on Zoom say, you know, hi Kenji, hello Alma, that sort of thing, then they feel like they belong. And so in some ways that's, and then we have arguments whether it's implicit or explicit. I think it's explicit because the teacher sets the tone for that. Okay, if you are just busy, don't want to be bothered, I'm setting things up, okay, class starts, I push the button, everyone is admitted, maybe, and then you do your job and transfer that information to a student that might appear marginalizing. They might feel like they don't belong. Now, beyond this, let me give you other examples. Now, when I taught in Arizona as a high school teacher, often I would invite, you know, Hispanic professionals, people from the Hispanic community, Spanish-speaking community, that professionals who maybe have gone to college or had, you know, interesting jobs and things, to come and talk to my students. Why would I do that? Because my students, 80% of them were pretty much Hispanic themselves. And so I wanted the students to see people who represented their own culture in my classroom. I also adjusted a lot of times my curriculum based on who was in the room. Like, for example, one semester I had a couple of kids from Korea. So I included some discussion of Korean history in my history class, you know, because well, these kids are here. I want to make them feel welcome, and also take advantage of the fact that they're here. I can kind of, you know, teach other kids about them. You know, that was part of it. I also was always a proponent of mainstreaming, which is where you have children who might suffer from learning or physical disabilities, who are, you know, to the best of their abilities, sometimes with an assistant, are brought into, quote unquote, a regular classroom. Again, I wanted them to feel like they had a sense of belonging. I wanted, you know, I would have asked kids to help them with their books and things like that. You know, I wanted them to feel like they were not marginalized, that they belonged in that room. Okay, so these are just some examples of how we can make people feel like they're centralized, like they belong in that environment. And absence of doing that might be in environments where they feel like they are marginalized. Okay. You know, sometimes it can happen in very strange little ways. I had an elementary school teacher, and bless her heart, I know what she was trying to do. But if you were having trouble in, let's say, school or something, like a slow reader or something, she would have you come to the front of the room, and you would sit, your desk would be right in front of hers. And so because everybody kind of knew that that was going on, it became almost marginalizing. Like, you know, I know she wanted to pay closer attention to these youngsters, but she identified them by pushing them to the front, so that everybody said, oh yeah, I can't do his multiplication tables, oh, can't spell yet, you know, falling behind. And these kids would feel marginalized by that, because they were kind of, there was attention given to them, but in the peer environment it tended to be clouded as negative. So anyway, that's a 2x2 matrix. And now, how do we avoid marginalizing kids? How do we encourage them to feel like they're centralized, to feel like they belong? The research keeps talking about peer-to-peer interaction. It's so important that we need to build in everything we do and some sort of peer-to-peer interaction. Now, I'm not doing a great job of it here today. Trust me, there'll be some opportunities for discussion and things. And then, of course, in my second presentation, I've got a few little things that we'll be doing. But peer-to-peer interaction is important. It's important at every stage of education, even in adult education. So we have to remember that. And design content with cultural inclusion in mind. Now, oftentimes, if we're teaching in an environment where everybody kind of comes from the same culture, all right, but then there are all sorts of things that maybe you can even talk about within that context. But if you have a multicultural classroom, for example, like I did in the US, like I do often at Akita because of our international students, thinking about cultural inclusion is important. You don't want kids to feel marginalized because you never talk about anything that has anything to do with them. This is also why it's kind of important for teachers to be aware of the cultures of their people within their classes. I remember when I was a high school teacher in Phoenix, Arizona, because there was a Native American reservation nearby with the Chiricahua tribe, otherwise known as the Apache tribe, one of the Apache tribes. We had some Native American students in our classes. And I had gotten my master's degree up in Northern Arizona, and one of my jobs was for the Bureau of Indian Affairs to help tutor Native American students. So I was kind of aware of a lot of cultural things. And I remember one teacher coming in, kind of the break room, complaining that this one kid who was Native American would not look at him when he was talking to him. And I had to kind of tell this teacher who was upset because in the Western American kind of idea, you know, you show your respect to an adult by looking at the adult when he or she is talking to you. You don't look down, you look eye to eye. That's showing respect. I had to explain to this teacher that no, this kid is being respectful to you. In the Native American context, specifically in the context of that tribe's culture, it's considered incredibly rude for a youngster to look directly in the eye of an adult. The youngster should look down, lower the eyes. And so I told the teacher, he's being completely respectful to you. You just didn't understand his culture. And now, of course, the kid ultimately will need to kind of be educated too, because he would have had to encounter lots of different types of people to understand the differences in cultural expectations. Okay, so cultural inclusion is important. Knowing something about the student's culture is important. I think that's one of the keys for a teacher. One of our tasks too. Developing introduction prompts. I'm going to talk about how important icebreakers are. They are so vital. And you have to make the most of them because kids need to feel like they belong in that environment. And then they also talk about a less formal approach. You know, it's not that you need, if you're kind of a more of a formal individual, we're not asking you to change the way you are, but students at all ages seem to say they kind of like the more familiar, less formal approach of teachers, you know, where you know their first name and this, and you talk to them, you know, pleasantly. And we don't want to make the classroom too casual, but making it really formal and rigid might make a lot of kids feel uncomfortable. So that's another thing from our research now. My research from my context actually comes out of administrator meetings with students that we did at the end of our first semester of online instruction. We had focus groups, we had student end of term surveys, a lot of things going on. And we had a couple of recommendations that came directly from our young scholars, our students. And this is what they said. They wanted icebreakers. Now, we make a big thing about icebreakers sometimes in education, but this is university level. And the kids were saying, listen, with the online learning, they felt they were not really getting to know their peers. So they wanted some icebreakers. They wanted to have a chance, maybe the first class, to spend time finding out who everybody was. All right. And they also said that they liked having breakout room sessions. They really liked those because, again, it gave them a chance to talk to each other. And then this thing was a suggestion of hallway conversations. I'll explain a little bit more there about that later. So these are a couple of ideas. All right. Now, icebreakers and breakout rooms. I'm going to kind of combine the two. And we know that the purpose is to allow students to kind of get to know each other, right? To build community. And I like this quote from, he's actually a Canadian philosopher, believe it or not. Great teachers give us a sense not only of who they are, but more important of who we are and who we might become. I think that's important, you know, that we're trying to help people get to know who they are. And some of the way we allow them to get to know who they are is by allowing them to express who they think they are to other people. And there's some surveys. We have this from 2000, Glenn. And Glenn kind of did a survey of about 220 university students 20 years ago now. But basically asking students about the courses they've taken and if they were teaching methods or strategies that were employed that helped them learn. And are there teacher behaviors that motivate them, make them want to learn, make them want to come to class, make them want to dig in and really get to know the content? And three main points came out of that survey. Number one, students said, I want the instructor to know my name and a little bit about me. Now, if we teach really big classes, I get it. I have trouble memorizing names. I do use a set of cards with the kids' names on them and their picture. In Japan, kids usually don't mind having their picture taken, and you know they also will. I just tell them to provide me with a picture, and I put it on a card along with their name, and that way I can kind of use those to remember names and also to kind of divide people up into groups, all sorts of things when we're physically together. But I use the cards even online because I like to know who the kids are. and remind myself. So before a class session, you know, until I got the names down, locked in my mind, I'll kind of do a little quiz, and I'll kind of look at the faces and try to remember who they are. And that means that when they show up in my session, I can greet them. I can say, "Hey, Kenji, uh, how's it going?" I can talk to Yuki's over here, and you know, I mean, I think the most beautiful sound, people have said, the most beautiful sound in the world is the sound of our own names. We react to it, don't we? I knew when I was a high school teacher, if there was a fight going on in the hallway, if I, you know, outside the classroom, if I walked out and I knew the names of the two kids who were involved in the fight, I could stop the fight instantaneously by yelling out, you know, like Jorge and Lupe, stop. As soon as they heard their names, they seemed to freeze. So names are important. Make sure you know the kids' names. I want the instructor to be human. What do we mean by that? Probably they want to know a little bit about you. Maybe you were like me when you were in elementary school and you saw one of your teachers out on the street or in the shopping in a store. It seemed very strange because you thought that, oh, the teacher is only in the classroom. What is this teacher doing in the store? So they want to know something about you a little bit. We have to be willing to share a few items of our, you know, things that we like to do, where we come from, something, so that there's a connection. And I want to feel as if the instructor respects me as a person. That, you know, that old math teacher, I didn't feel respected me as a person, or anybody in that room, or respects my opinions. You know, so if you've created a welcoming environment where the kid feels safe asking questions, if they have trouble, they feel comfortable seeking you out to get some assistance, you've done a great thing. And a few other pieces of research. They want you to humanize and manage the learning environment, like the emotional climate of the classroom, directly related to the attainment of academic excellence. Wilkinson and Ansel said this. If you want them to succeed academically, you need to make sure that they feel emotionally connected to that environment, that they feel comfortable. And students need to, this is McGlynn again, begin interacting with each other from the very first class session. You know, they need to have an opportunity to have some peer involvement. They need to learn about their peers. They need to share information about themselves. And so the research is pretty clear. Students' perseverance in that classroom of yours, of mine, is dependent on the relationships that they build, the relationship they have with their peers, the relationship they have with their instructor. That's important. So I'm going to start with icebreakers. I'm going to talk about 5 of them quickly. Now I'm going to share all of these. I'm going to make the PowerPoints into PDFs and things, and we'll share them with BIL. They can share them with you. I'm going to try to put them in the chat function too. We'll see how successful I am with that. So you will have access to these, okay? I want you to have these. And the Pecha of me, personal reference inventory, the 4 what questions, uncommon commonalities, and anxious and happy. These are little icebreakers and what I call kind of check-ins. Now, Pecha was developed in Japan. It involves 20 slides, PowerPoint slides. Each slide has a picture from digital resources, maybe from students, etc. It shouldn't have many words or words at all. Usually we encourage no words, maybe 1 word, and that's about it, okay? So each slide allows only 20 seconds for an explanation. So you got about 6 minutes and 40 seconds for the whole presentation. So it's quick. And I have them do a Pecha of me. Of course, I do an example first. And so what I ask them to do is prepare a slide presentation, which we do online. We can also do this when we go back into the classroom, just in a regular PowerPoint. A slide showing them at a younger age, a slide showing their hobby or pastime, a slide showing a trip that they took that they enjoyed, a slide showing their future dream, and then any other slides they think up to 20. So they have up to the 20 limit that they think shares information about them that they want their peers to know. Okay, and I, of course, do an example. I talk about where I come from. You know, I grew up in Michigan. I talk about, you know, me now. Okay, here I am, nice and bald. But look at me when I was younger. I actually had hair, looked like John Lennon. I grew up in Michigan. Picture my high school where I've lived, you know, Abu Dhabi, where I lived for a number of years in the Middle East. It's kind of neat. I talk about my interest in medieval history, you know, coming here to Japan, you know, the bears, my scuba diving hobby, my siblings, you know, a little bit about the winter here, you know, the fact that I like to come to Bangladesh to do work with teachers, all sorts of things, including pets, all right? And where I want to go in the future, I want to go to Machu Picchu. I've never been to South America. I want to go to Machu Picchu. Okay, so that's a Pechacucha. And you know, it's a great little exercise. Of course, it depends on how big the class is and that, but if it's small enough that you can do this in one session or so, I think it's completely worthwhile to have the kids do this so that they really get to know each other. And then I also have, and again, you don't need to do all of these. You can pick and choose, you know, this one or that one. A personal reference inventory is very quick, kind of easy. I give them a set of questions. I share them in the Zoom sec function during class. Maybe I give it to them ahead of time. I give an example of my own answers. I assign breakout rooms and have the students share their answers. I instruct each Zoom breakout room group to select at least one response from each breakout room member to share. And what are the questions? They're very typical questions, like who is your hero? What irritates you the most about the world? What do you consider to be your greatest accomplishment? They get people talking about themselves and sharing about themselves. And then they come back together, they share some interesting tidbits about people in their breakout room. You know, it takes a few minutes. It takes maybe, I do this a half an hour, you know, a half an hour in the breakout rooms, from the giving the assignment to the breakout rooms to coming back and sharing in a typical size class. I also do this thing called the 4 what questions. And again, you don't need to do all of these. I use some for some classes, some for others. What are 3 things that worry you as you start this course? You know, worry 1, worry 2, worry 3, maybe worry 1, homework, worry 2, assessments, worry 3. You know, am I going to be able to get to class on time? Yeah, it's great because you can kind of learn what their concerns are and maybe try to ameliorate them or at least be aware of them. You know, sometimes they can be real, you know, honest things, like a kid's commuting from home to get to the campus. You know, they're 45 minutes away. It's winter. They don't know if they're going to have trouble with the roads. You know, they have an arbito, which is a part-time job, and they're worried about whether they'll have time to do their job and also their homework. All sorts of things that you learn about the kids. And what is your strength as a student or a person? What do you need to work on as a student or a person? What would you like to learn in this course? So this is kind of nice because I get an idea where they are in their concerns and also what they're trying to get out of the course. And sometimes kids are honest. They say, I just need the credit because I want to graduate. Well, okay, you know, at least you know where they're coming from. My wife is an educator and she really likes this one, uncommon commonalities. She assigns groups of 4. I've used these 2, but she really gets into this. She assigns groups of 4 to a Zoom breakout room, and then the students are given the uncommon commonalities assignment. They are asked to choose the Zoom breakout room leader, and this is what they do. They talk about things that they have in common, and then ultimately they get to things that they don't have in common that are kind of neat. Like maybe, you know, they have for the final thing, all 4 of the students say that, listen, all of us are, you know, students at AIU. Okay, that starts it. Maybe you have the group, for whatever reason, has 4 young ladies. Oh, we're all young ladies. Okay. And then they get down to like, oh, do you like tennis? Oh, no, I don't like tennis. But, oh, I like tennis. And so you find out, okay, 3 people like tennis. 2 people really like horror movies. And then you find out really crazy individual things, like this student bungee jumped in New Zealand when she was on study abroad. You know, that's kind of fun. And so they talk and they share and they laugh. And then you get back together and you ask them, okay, what do you have all in common? What were some interesting, unique things that they can share? Again, it doesn't take much time. My wife usually says she jumps in and it joins a group too. So she likes it. This one, anxious and happy, is actually something that I do at different times in the semester just to see how everybody is. But I usually use this a lot during the first part and then towards midterms maybe and towards the end. I ask them, I tell them we're going to get you in a breakout room, and I want you to tell me something that makes you anxious right now. And maybe if it's early in the semester, they say, oh, making friends or associations in the class, or maybe, you know, figuring out how I'm going to schedule my time to get that paper done, you know, things like that. And then something that makes them happy. You know, so what makes you happy right now? And a lot of kids, when they first get here, you know, they'll say, oh, I'm happy because I'm in university. You know, I had to take an entrance exam, everything else, and here I am at AIU. So happy. Anxious because I'm wondering if I can succeed here studying all in English. Okay, and I do this, like I said, throughout the year, throughout the term. Hallway conversations. Now, remember this, before the pandemic, you know, kids would get together in the classroom before our university classes would start. They chat to each other. They see each other in the hallway and they stop and they chat for a few minutes. I mean, these little social interactions might seem not so important at first blush, but I think they're vital. I think they really give us a sense of belonging. You know, talking to a couple of friends, saying hello, just, you know, what's going on? Oh yeah, I'm doing this. I'm going to go to this movie on the weekend. It's vital. So how do we allow kids who are now separate, you know, they're at their hometown and their home, maybe their bedroom where they're at their kitchen table taking the classes, how do we duplicate the chance for this hallway conversation? Well, this idea actually came from our dean of students. Okay, I'm the dean of academic affairs. Naganuma Sensei is the dean of students, and she does this. She teaches English, and she says, oh, you know what I do? I open my Zoom session 10 to 15 minutes early. I just open it, I let everybody in, I tell them, oh, listen, I'm gonna just be grading papers over here. I'm gonna take my earphones off. You guys can just talk. Anything you wanna talk about, don't worry about it. I'm not eavesdropping. And then if she can, she also leaves it open for a few minutes after the class. Same thing. So kids can just gather and chat openly, you know, just in the Zoom session. You know, she doesn't start the class right on time and finish it right on time. She opens it a few minutes early. She closes it after a few minutes at the end, and the kids get a chance to talk a bit. Harmless, right? And not difficult to do at all. Of course, your schedule may or may not allow this day to day, but if you can do this, hey, why not? She says the kids love it. She has a lot of success with it. What I do is I keep Zoom office hours. I try to do that with the opening and closing a little late, not always have the time for it, but I have Zoom office hours. Monday through Thursday, 4 to 5, all the kids know they can find me in my Zoom office hour. I just open the Zoom session. I'm sitting here taking care of business or work or grading, and kids come in, they pop in, oh, okay, there's Kenji. And so I talk to Kenji about whatever he needs. What's neat about this, I think is kind of fun, is that at the beginning of the semester, a lot of kids come in to talk to me as dean or as professor, and a lot of serious questions and all this sorts of stuff. But as the semester goes through, a lot of them just pop in to say hello. You know, it's kind of like a kid would walk down the hallway and just, you know, see your doors open, you know, wave, say, hey, Dr. Pat, how you doing? And so, you know, it's nice, and they'll do that. And so they just pop in and hey, how are you doing, Dr. Pat? Long time no see. And we'll chat for a few minutes, and then we'll say bye, and they'll go off, and I'll keep the session open. You know, it's harmless, right? And so I advertise this information. If I send an email out, in my email signature, I have my office hour listed there with the Zoom link. And also faculty can find me that way too. Again, I'm a dean, so occasionally faculty need to talk to me about things that they need, so they know that they can come to the office hour too. And I can make it private, you know, I just let one person in at a time, and I tell everybody, okay, and just unless you need to come in as a group, just one person at a time, it's private, no problem. And I'd use the chat function so students can express concerns and ask questions, all right? We all kind of know the chat function, right? And so sometimes I just ask the students, you know, how are things going? Okay, maybe I finish a concept in educational philosophy, and I say, okay, perennialism. We just finished perennialism. I want you to tell me in the chat, privately, just to me only, on a scale, a Likert scale, saying 5 means you understand everything. It's brilliant. Everything's great. By the way, 5 is the top number in the Japanese high school grading scheme. So, when I say 5, they get it. Oh, yeah, that's like an A to them. So I understand everything. Great. It's no problem. All the way down to 0, which means I need help. I don't understand this. Can we repeat? And I tell them to chat that to me privately. And so then suddenly, boom, I get all of these numbers and I can see, okay, all right. I have Yuka here is about a 4. That's good. Okay, I see over here, Bano-san is about a 2. I better pay attention to that kid on this. And if a lot of kids say 1 or 2, I figure, hey, I better repeat this. I better go back. And so it's a nice, quick way to find out. And the kids will value that because you're checking in to see how they're doing. Also, let the kids themselves, and I say kids, I mean, young college students or whoever you're teaching, let them be creative, because often they will come up with great ideas. Like this is an example from, I heard about. It's a Zoom bingo game. So the teacher just asks questions like, what do you have the first thing in the morning? And so kids write down coffee, water, tea, whatever. And then they just, on a card, they hold up the card to the camera. And then if you see in your Zoom thing a straight line of water or coffee or tea or whatever it is, then you can yell out bingo. Okay. And it's kind of a fun, silly thing, but I can see potential for going through vocabulary with learners of a second language, all sorts of things. It's fun. Why not? And how about something as simple as this? Let's have a strange hat day. All right. Again, okay, it's silly, yes, but these are college students. Some look like adult students. And just, they're smiling, they're having fun. And occasionally we can do silly, crazy things like this just to make everybody feel like, oh yeah, it's fun. Let's remember that education should also occasionally, if it can't always be, it should try to be occasionally fun. And so it's just something some kids came up with. Hey, let's have a hat day, since, in Zoom, all you can see are people from here to here. It made sense. And so there we are. Even the professor's wearing a silly hat. All right. So it's fun. And now I know I am an administrator, so I have a little bit more control of things. I can kind of suggest things and kind of make things happen. But I think that, if you can, try to encourage your administration to have dialogues with students. Maybe have, like we had here on our campus via Zoom, we had really huge interest in student dialogues with administration, with the president, the vice presidents, deans. And we would just allow the students to talk and tell us what their concerns were, with this online education and things that they were worried about or needed information on. And, it was good. I mean, the kids knew that we were listening. And another thing that came up is a teacher came up with this idea, Friday night conversations, just, again, to have networking, allow people to talk. He said, okay, it's Friday night, no classes. Here's the Zoom address. Everybody can show up, and we'll just, get people into different Zoom rooms. If you want to talk about sports, you want to talk about this, and everybody can kind of organize. And they were very popular. They are still popular. Again, it's just kids wanting to talk to other kids and teachers. We had faculty involved too, who would just come in. And then we had something called Zoom supporters. These started off as volunteers, but now we actually pay them. We've hired them. These are our students who are a little bit more tech savvy, and they have volunteered initially. Now we've been able to get a little budget to pay them, some of them, I think all of them, a little bit. And so they will, if a teacher has something they need, they need some help with Zoom or something during a class, they will contact the Zoom supporters, and one of the Zoom supporters will be there to kind of co-host if the teacher needs to do some fancy things. If a student is having trouble with Zoom or technology, they can contact one of the Zoom supporters. They have phone numbers, line addresses, as well as email addresses, and they can get support if they're having tech issues. And sometimes the Zoom supporter has to contact the tech team, but you know, it's a kid talking to another kid, and sometimes that's important just so they feel like they're not in this alone if they're having trouble. So my conclusion, and yeah, oh, time is flying here, is that research on the need for students to feel that they belong to a community is there. We know that they need to feel like they belong to succeed. I've shared some ideas from practice that have been shown to work, you know, from my own experience and from others. And I think we need to remember that let students participate in building the community. Okay, it's their task too. I talk to my students a lot about agency. And I tell them agency doesn't just mean that you have rights and that you have, you know, you're able to, you know, do things and be self-actualized in the classroom. It also means that you have responsibilities. That the class is not just the teachers. It belongs to you too. And you have to work with the teacher and with your peers to make it a success. Shared responsibility. That will help, you know, make them feel like they belong. Encourage universities and schools to hold online events and give online support. Again, you might be junior faculty, you don't know how you do this. Well, talk to, you know, your department chair, talk to senior professors, talk to people and see if they can help organize some things for people to network. I mean, and even sometimes it's just telling the kids, do you have any ideas? Ways that we could have some sort of, one kid came up with this thing called the cafe, the coffee shop or something. Yeah, coffee shop. And so in the middle of the day, he would open things up where people could just stop by and say hello. Again, it was just another very simple Zoom session where you could come in like in the middle of the day, have a coffee break and just chat for that. And it was just kind of a Zoom room, a gathering place. And it was successful. All right, these are my online references. These are my text references. And I'm going to stop sharing here. And I'm going to see if I can find my PowerPoint on this. And I will share that. Ah, here it is. I'm hoping it's coming through, sending. It might take a minute. Okay, so everybody, you've got my PowerPoint right there from what I just covered. We don't have much time. I think I'm supposed to finish this session at about 2:15 maximum. And then I'll give a couple minute breaks and then we'll come back to the second session. But do we have any questions? Do we have any comments? I think I have somebody who is helping to collect questions and comments. I'm going to kind of like look through these and see. And also, by the way, you're more than welcome just to chime in right now. Okay. Oh, here's somebody who's saying, "Oh, I'm at a good evening." So we have somebody who's in one of the time zones that's evening already. Oh yes. Oh, Indonesia, Philippines. Wow, we have people from everywhere. Malaysia. Wonderful. Okay. Do we have any questions, or have I overwhelmed you? There's nothing anyone can say. I think if I again have to just say, one of the significant tasks of us as educators, and no matter what you teach, no matter what level you teach, is still to develop this sense of an academic community within your classroom environments, because all of our research shows that if people feel like they belong, that they feel good about being there, even if it's a Zoom class, then they're going to be in a much better situation to succeed. I think back, I've taken courses that have really been very difficult for me in the past, and I've succeeded because, unlike my math classes in high school, I felt like I belonged. I felt like the professor was interested in helping. I felt like the professor and the peers that I had in the class, everybody was working together. And though the subject matter might have been very difficult for me, I was able to get through it because I felt teacher cares. I can approach the teacher if I got a question, no problem. I can go to office hours, ask questions, great. And the peers were all kind of in it together, like helping each other. Nobody was, being a dead weight, and nobody was trying to be, critical of anybody else. So all of those things were key. Okay. Let's see. Do we have any questions? Okay, thank you. A few people are saying it's a good session. I'm glad. All right. Okay, if there are no questions, then what we should do, I think, is take just a short break, a really short break. Let's say if we come back.
Probably some of the participants have questions.
Oh, please, yes, go ahead. If you could just ask the question, I'm happy to answer. Or if somebody was collecting the questions, please ask the questions. Anybody have any questions?
I think Nurmala Simbolan wanted to ask a question. Would you kindly ask the question, please?
Go ahead.
If you want, you can write it in the chat box, or you can ask the question verbally.
Yes, go ahead. So either write it or ask the question, no problem. I think that would be, let's see, Nirmala Simbolan.
Nirmala Simbolan.
Yes,
Simbolan.
you have a question?
Did you have a question? Could you kindly write the question or ask the question, whatever is convenient for you?
Go ahead. Okay, do you have any suggestions to create an effective instruction in the online class? Well, yes. I think that, you know, the first session was basically deal with developing this sense of community. And if you can do that, then you're going to be more successful with the online medium of instruction anyway. But a lot of the teachers that I've been working with over the last 6-7 months, as we kind of enter this Zoom environment, and we're using all sorts of platforms like our Moodle system and that, to actualize our teaching. I think the things that are still key is that you try to break up the class session so that you still think, okay, it shouldn't just be pure lecture. Now today, you know, I'm giving you examples and things like that, but if this was my university class, I would break things up. I would have the kids, you know, maybe work on a question at the beginning of class. I would give them a question in the chat box. I would say, okay, that's the question I want you to think about first. Or I give them a quote. I like to use quotes a lot that relates to the topic for the lesson. And then I say, okay, I want you to think about this quote. I want you to talk to your peers about it. Tell me about a reaction to it, good or bad. What does this quote do for you? Then I send them off into their breakout rooms for 5 minutes. And then I visit the breakout rooms too. Yeah, depending on how big the class is, I can get around to all of them or at least a few of them. And then I bring everybody back together, and then we have a chat about, okay, what was that? What was the quote to you? And I'll call on a few people or ask for some volunteers. And then after that kind of opening, I will then switch into, I still, you know, give kind of instruction, sometimes direct instruction about key points that I think they need to know. And then I will again break off into a breakout room where I'm having them kind of share work on some sort of a task. I try very hard when I set up a lesson to break it into sections so it keeps them fresh, it keeps things interesting, and I try to find opportunities for them to work peer to peer as much as possible. So the breakout rooms are key for me, making sure they have a chance to kind of talk and share. And then coming back together in the big group and I visiting the breakout rooms. These are a few ways that you can make your online instruction dynamic, interesting, and in a way, I think, creative. Okay, I don't know. I hope that kind of leads you down a path that can help. And also, we're kind of lucky now because there's a lot of discussion about online education. So they're great websites that we can access. Many of them put on by a lot of, you know, key name universities around the world to help their faculty and faculty everywhere transition into this online medium. And by the way, the one thing I've told my faculty is that even after this pandemic is over, we are still going to keep elements of online instruction. We've come too far. We've learned too much to just say, okay, it's over. We're going to go back to the regular classroom. Yes, we will go back to in-person. We will do that. But I think we have learned so much about technology in such a short time that we need to, and we figured out how useful it can be. You know, that we can start to do things like, you know, COIL classes where we have a course that we share with one of our partner institutions. We had one course like that last in the spring, where we had students who were at a university in Italy working with students from our university online, you know, shared lectures, shared discussion. Everybody was doing things in English, the Italian students, the Japanese students, doing a project, things like that. So there are all sorts of wonderful opportunities now that we have figured out through our understanding now of technology that we should continue trying to do. So I think old dinosaurs like me, I think we need to stay in tune with what's happening technologically in education, and take advantage of the things that we think we can really use. There are lots of things I call bells and whistles, you know, that are just kind of cool and neat and fun, but and maybe not so useful, maybe useful, but there are some key things in the technology that I think are very robust, that can honestly help us improve our educational environment for our students. So nobody needs to feel excluded. Let's say a kid is absent for a couple of days because they have a hospitalization, or they have an issue with you know, a parent's ill, or they're ill or something. We can still keep them in the mix. Our classrooms here at AIU, we're actually building in the technology now. So even if you're in a person-to-person class, you can still have kids online. You can still see them. You can still have them interact. And this will be part of our idea too about COIL classes, where we have, you know, associations with other universities, you know, teaching with our university. Okay, that was a good question. I hope I answered it. All right. Okay.
Dr. Patrick, I
Yes.
have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
My name is Mamunur Rashid. I am
Yes.
a lecturer at BIL.
Okay.
So I have a question regarding student burnout and stress. As you know, we have suddenly transitioned to online classes worldwide, and there are issues regarding student burnout as well as stress due to the pandemic.
Yes.
So my question is how we can address the issue of student burnout and stress to promote a positive academic community.
I think it's what you're saying there is very important. I think there are elements of stress that kids are going through, students are going through, and adults are going through, faculty included, due to the pandemic. You know, people are separate from loved ones, they're isolated perhaps, maybe some people are in quarantine, there are all sorts of issues. The stress level is quite high, as well as people, unfortunately, maybe they have relatives, people they know who have passed away due to COVID. So yes, the stress level is extreme. So it's important for us to remember that. And how can we deal with it? I think one way we can do it within the context of our own classes is offering students what I've talked about, which is a sense of belonging. I'll share a story about, it's an unfortunate story, but I think it's powerful in a sense. When I was in the Middle East, I was working with adults who were getting their master's degrees in education, and a lot of my students were young Emirati women. We had kind of a hybrid delivery system for the courses. And we had one young lady, one of her children passed away. It was very tragic. And, you know, you would think this terrible. And she was in class the next week. And I asked her how she was doing. And, you know, I actually, you know, at that point, she was in another location. So I was talking to her via the Skype function that we were using at the time. And I asked her, are you okay being back? I mean, in the class. And she said, I need to be here. My classmates are like my sisters now. They support me. I feel loved here. So I'm suffering a lot, you know, of sadness, but when I come here, I feel better. And so I think we need to recognize that this connection, having the students feel like they belong in that classroom, that you care about them as the educator, that their peers care about them, that they have a safe place where they can talk about issues, will help a lot to decrease the stress. Now, in Japan, the culture is not one of people sharing a lot. to be honest. This old idea of, okay, I'm the samurai and I don't show emotion is still very strong in the culture. But still, if they have a sense that they belong, if they have a sense that people care about them, if they know the teacher can, they can approach a teacher if they have problems or issues, and the teacher will be open to listening to them and trying to help. Sometimes just listening is all you can do, and it's all they really need. So I think the things I've covered in the first session will actually help with the issue of stress in these classes. I believe, I really trust that that will take place. Okay. All right. I tell you what, we will have another opportunity to ask questions after the next session. And if you have a question from this session that you want to ask then, that's perfectly fine. But why don't I give you a couple of minutes of just a break? Maybe you need to go get some water or something. That's fine. I'm looking at my clock. And so maybe if we can have about 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, then we'll come back together. Okay, that way you can go get some water or tea or whatever you need to do. So 5 minutes. I'm going to put my my video off for a moment because I need to go get some more water. I get a dry throat when I do these things. So I'll be back in 5 minutes and then we will start. Okay? All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Within 5 minutes.
Thank you, Patrick. We'll be back in 5 minutes.
Okay. And if anybody wants to talk to me during the little couple of minute break, you're more than welcome to do so. I think. I try to share my next one.
We had probably a few more questions. So if you want, you can address this right now, or you can address it at the end of the session.
Sure. Go ahead. Ask me the questions. No problem. What are the questions?
There is a question from Mr. Amin.
Okay.
That how can the teachers adopt connectivism from other theories in the new context?
One more time with the question, please.
How can the teachers adopt connectivism? How can they create a connection with other theories in the new context? Since this is a new context, probably how the theories in the context of normal scenario or in the normal context can be related with the new normal situation.
I see. I think a lot of things that are very sturdy for us is, like, for example, educational philosophy. I'm an educational philosopher, actually, and I pay close attention to these theories. Are just as active in the online environment as they would be in a face-to-face class. I think that that is a little bit disconcerting for a lot of people because they think, oh, it's such a completely new medium. But in a lot of ways, depending on how you're approaching what you're doing, we talk about synchronous classes and asynchronous classes. Of course, synchronous classes is where you have a dialogue going on with the students. It's live. They see the teacher, you see them, everything is there. Then we also have asynchronous classes where maybe the teacher has made a video of him or herself giving a lecture, or you've given them a task to do and they're off doing it. At AIU, Akita International University, because we are a liberal arts institution, because we kind of use more of a Socratic sort of system for our educational delivery, we try very hard to do most of our courses synchronously. And so the classroom environment is still the classroom environment. Teacher, students, everyone interacting at the same time. So I think a lot of the theories, a lot of the ideas that apply to a regular classroom, meaning brick and mortar, you sitting there with desks and all that, apply equally forcefully to the online environment. The question is, and this is where the debates are, asynchronous education, where students are not interacting with the teacher or their peers necessarily in asynchronous educational environments. Are those the ones which are impacting our students positively or negatively? The research is still going on that. We do have teachers who occasionally have asynchronous classes, and I don't oppose those occasions. I think sometimes they're good, and sometimes they're simply necessary. For example, we have a couple of professors who are in the United States right now because Japan shut down in March, and they've been very, careful about accepting people back into the country. So those professors, I have actually 3 of them, 2 of them are English teachers, one of them teaches geography. They've been teaching from the United States. So sometimes they have asynchronous classes only because the time difference is such that they would have to teach at 3 in the morning. And they can't do that every time, of course. So those are the conditions. And we're flexible. We get it. So we're not opposing that. But the students, the responses we have received within our context at AIU from students is that they want the synchronous education whenever possible. That they feel that the Zoom environment can be as supportive for their educational endeavors as a regular classroom if the teacher's approaching it in the correct way. Whatever the correct way might be depends on the course a little bit, but also are they adhering to the things that I talked about in the first session? Are they paying attention to the students' well-being? Are they trying to not marginalize kids? All of those things will allow us. So the connections you make, using some of the techniques I suggested, maybe things that you can find from your peers, will help you. But yes, you do have to make these connections. And I think a lot of the theories and the techniques and everything else that we've talked about for decades for brick and mortar classrooms still apply to the online environment. The one caveat would be asynchronous education, whether that is able to fulfill the needs of the students psychologically, socially, and then of course that would lead into academic experience. I did a master's degree, an early master's degree. I already had my doctorate, but I decided to get a master's degree in applied linguistics. And it wasn't online because there was nothing online at the time. But what they would do is they would send me boxes of books and materials, and I had to read them and do the exercises and everything else. And it was completely asynchronous, other than my chance occasionally to talk to my professor by phone. And I did this because of where I was in my life. I know small children. I was working in Japan at the time. I just needed to do this, I felt, for my own career. And I told people, who asked me how it was, I said, listen, if that was my very first experience of a master's degree as a graduate student, I would have just fallen apart because it was just almost too independent. I didn't know what I was, but because I had already had my doctorate, I already had 2 other master's degrees, I knew what I was doing. I knew how to do research. I understood everything. So I could read the materials. I could write the papers. I could do this. I could do that. That was no problem. But if I was and I was, by that time I was in my late 30s, but if I was, in my mid 20s or earlier trying to do that as a first master's degree, I would have probably given up. So asynchronous versus synchronous. We'll have to that'll be a debate and discussion for another day. Okay, I'm looking at my clock and I recognize that I have an hour, and, I always think I can do things in an hour and then I have trouble. I'm going to talk about alternative assessments. This one I actually have a few little video clips. We'll see. That means I need to remind myself to share the computer sound. And, let's see. I wanted to also share. Let me do one thing here. I've shared with you my alternate assessment PowerPoint already, I want to share a couple more little documents that I will be referring to. Here's one. There's that. Oops, the network's disconnected now. Okay, I'll try to resend that later. Sometimes that happens. Don't know why. Okay, here it is. Slideshow. There we go. Okay, everybody. The next session that I'm doing, I'll kind of like switch gears a little bit. Alternative assessment strategies. Now, assessment is something that teachers do. We do it formally. We do it casually. We're always assessing. We're trying to figure out how and what our kids are learning. Again, kids. I call them kids. College students to me now seem so young. I do have a few adult students, so adult meaning people nearer my age, and so I should probably not call everybody kids, but it's a habit. So this is the abstract for the second thing I'm doing, going to cover with you. And I want to draw your attention to this. What are we trying to do with assessment? Okay, to discover the extent of student understanding. All right, that's the key. Are they understanding? And beyond that, are they understanding how they can apply what they're learning? Are they understanding how their learning fits in with everything else? One of the things that I'll go back to talking about math again. One of the things I learned when I was in university is I had to take one math class when I was in university, and I was dreading it. I was a humanities person studying Renaissance and medieval history and English literature, and so math. And my nightmares of math in high school carried with me for a few years in college. But I had to take a course, so I put it off until literally my senior year. And I found a course that I thought sounded interesting to me. It was the philosophy of mathematics, and I thought, wow, okay. And so I went in, and this little tiny professor, I just remember him, he's a delightful fellow, and he had worked for years for the American Defense Department. This is kind of a scary side of what he used to do. But he was one of the guys who would aim missiles. So he was a physicist. He had physics and he had mathematics and he got his doctorate. But he finally just decided he had to leave that. He just didn't like aiming missiles at the Soviets and things like that. So he left that and he went into academia. And when he came into the classroom, I still remember this, the first thing he told us was, listen, to the Greeks, mathematics was a religion. I'm going to kind of teach it to you that way. And what he did that was brilliant was, and what I desperately think I needed when I was in high school, was he put math into a perspective that we who were mostly liberal arts majors could understand. He wouldn't just talk about a theorem and write it on the board and say, okay, know what this is and how to use it. He would explain where it came from, the history of it, and why it was essential. Like why was the discovery of the zero so important? You know, he would talk about that. And he gave us a perspective. He put my understanding of math now was fitting nicely into a puzzle that started to make a picture that I could grasp and understand. So that's what we try to do, I think, okay? We need to try to figure out, help our students take the information we're teaching them, we're having them encounter, and figure out how they can fit it into their world so that it makes sense. And there has been a tremendous shift in teaching environment, of course. We know that, right? I mean, this is how things probably looked not too many months ago. And now this is kind of how things look now. So things have changed, but people are still people, and kids still get confused, and teachers get frustrated, and all sorts of the human dynamics are still going on. I have a chat question I want for you to think about, and here it is. Actually, two questions. What have been the greatest challenges in assessing your students in the past? And what are the greatest challenges to assessment in online environments? What are the greatest challenges to assessment exist in online environments? Well, those are the two questions I want you to think about. Okay? Think about that for a minute. Write your answer to one or both of these questions in the chat function. if you can. Okay, I think you can get to the chat function, right? Or maybe I need to stop sharing. Okay, so here we go. So think about the greatest challenges you have faced in assessing your students in the past. How have are those challenges the same? Are there new challenges now in the online environment? I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. There we go. And maybe over the next 2 or 3 minutes, I'll find some responses showing up in my chat function. You can chat it to everybody. You can chat it just to me. It's okay. I'm hoping I get a few responses here. And I'm just going to do this to kind of help you out a bit. All right. Okay. So I'm just thinking challenges to assessment in the past and challenges to assessment in the online environment. All right, so that's what you're thinking about. And if I have a few responses, here it is. Okay, yes, challenges to assessment in the past. Okay, students don't learn from assessments and it should be a learning experience. Yes. I often tell my young scholars that if a teacher uses a test only to test you, then it's not an adequate use of time. I tell my young scholars that my purpose in tests is not just to test you, but also to help educate you. So I try to construct tests that do a little bit of that. So a lot of my tests, and it takes a lot more time, I'll be honest, to mark things. In the winter term, I tend to have, we usually have small classes, so we're lucky at AIU. But in the winter term, it's a very intense program. We don't have very many courses that students can take. So I tend to have very large classes in the winter, 50 students, 60, 90, 100, etc. And so, yeah, it is a challenge to mark these. But I ask a lot of questions that require reflection in my testing and my assessments. I don't want to just have them, by rote memorization, tell me this, this, and this. And I ask them how they're going to apply it. I'll show you some examples of how I do my assessments in a bit. Okay, the answer scheme is too rigid and some logical answers are not acceptable in the past. Yes, students tend to cheat now. Oh yes, I know what you mean. I'll talk a little bit from my own contacts with that. Okay, so I got a few responses there. I think we're doing pretty well with that. Let me, gotta remember I'm gonna share the computer sound. Okay, and where are we? There we go. Here we go. Okay, let me go back to my current slide. So I got a few responses there, and thank you. Some people mentioned, one person mentioned the cheating. Yeah, okay, let me be honest here. I'm the Dean of Academic Affairs, which means I'm in charge of academic. If somebody has any academic malfeasance, if they plagiarize, if they cheat, everything else, it comes to my desk. Okay, I'm responsible for sorting things out. In previous semesters, meaning before the spring semester where we went online, I might average 2 to 3 cases of academic dishonesty, plagiarism or cheating on a test or something per academic term. And, so, okay, deal with that. It's always unfortunate, but yes, it was part of my job, so I would deal with that with the disciplinary panel. And that was the norm, 2 or 3 in our student population, about 1,000. So really not much of a problem, right? I mean, kids test to get in here. The university is not easy to get into. They're very keen because they have to study in English. The caliber of the kid we get is pretty high. And so they're usually very dedicated and they're very good students anyway. So there's usually not a problem. Normally, if there was cheating, it tends to be because of stress and all sorts of things that we often try to deal with in as much of an empathetic way as we can within the structure of the fact it's still a disciplinary infraction. Well, when we went online, specifically with cheating on tests. I went from having maybe 2 cases, and then in the spring, I suddenly had 17, 18, 19, 20. And a lot of it, honestly, was, I think, teachers and students not communicating. Oftentimes, the teachers were trying to take the way they used to test, like multiple choice or this or that, and just like, okay, do this. And so I ended up having several sessions, like faculty development sessions, where I talked about assessment and the need to maybe adjust our assessment structures and mindset because of our online environment. Kids can access the internet. They can pick up their smartphone. You have no way of judging or seeing or knowing what they're doing out there. And we want everybody to be honest, naturally, but sometimes if you're tempting them by the type of test you offer. And we don't want them to give in to temptation, but isn't it better if we try to figure out ways that, that they can't really cheat, or going online or looking for things might actually help them show you that they're capable of doing the assessment. So anyway, that was a story from my context, which directly relates to the question or a point that an individual made. Okay, my agenda, and again, we'll see how much time. Purpose of alternative assessment, the need for active learning, authentic assessment, classroom assessment techniques. The last section is actually a way for you to check in with your students to see how they're doing, classroom assessment techniques. And then at the end, as time allows, we will have time for questions in that. Okay, so there are 4 typical types of assessment. You have your diagnostic, your formative, your interim, and your summative, right? I think most of us maybe know what these are, but I like the way Tukyon has kind of explained this. Some assessments are helpful before the race begins. I used to coach cross country and track. So running terms, it's been a long time since I was a runner myself, naturally, but I think of running, and how to strategize, get the kids so they can improve and do well in races. So the best running strategy, something, you check before, that's a diagnostic. Some assessments are beneficial during the race to track progress and see if adjustments to the strategy should be made during the race. So that's formative, why they're in the middle of it. You might adjust up or down, do this, do that. Okay, you're coming to some mud, so you got to change the way you're running. Go around the group, all sorts of things. I picture myself there with my clipboard and my hat and telling the kids, okay, Benny, you got to get around that group ahead before you go to the turn, all sorts of things. That's formative. And some assessments are given to see if students in entire schools or district, the entire running team, are moving forward. Those are the interim ones. We do this in public education where we have these big tests to see, are the kids getting it? What are their math scores? How are they at English? How are they at this? How are they at that? State mandated national tests, maybe. We had a lot of those in public education when I was in the US. And some assessments are best at the very end of the race to review performance, see how they did. So that's summative. All right, so I kind of like the way Jenny kind of put this together using the track sort of ideas. So alternative assessments, what are they? They kind of refer to performance tests that students can and cannot do. You're looking for what they can and cannot do. And you're also measuring how they can apply these. What's their proficiency in applying what you're learning to tasks? And it's got its view, I think, on looking at the future. Like, we learn a lot, of course, in our formal education. But then when you go to an office or you go to a company or you just go out there in life and you're doing things, it's rare that we encounter things like we did in school where, oh, okay, today in the morning, I'm only going to think about math. In the afternoon, I'll think about English. It doesn't work that way, does it? We never know when we're going to encounter environments or situations where we have to activate our learning that we had to figure things out. So I think the alternative assessments kind of had the view that you should put the kids in the environments and situations where they're applying what they're learning to kind of get them ready to apply their learning in the future when they finish formal education, or maybe even during, but not, you know, school related necessarily, where they can figure things out. And it looks at student mastery and the application of the knowledge that they have. All right, and key words for me would be action and application. And please understand, it's not meant to completely replace the usual form of assessments. We have things that we're mandated that we have to do, right? You probably have national tests you might need to give. You might have a curriculum that you have to, you know, test, a summative test at the end of that. There are all sorts of things that we have to do. We get that, but the alternative assessments are supposed to allow you to maybe have windows into how your kids are learning while they're learning, and also to see if they can comprehend how this learning will help them in the future, how they can apply their learning to situations. It's kind of like where they're trying to fit their learning into their worldview, into their understanding of the world. Okay. And it's part of a shifting of the paradigm. Now, by the way, if you could mute yourselves, remember to mute yourselves. Thank you. When the kids come to AIU, I tell them I want them to shift their paradigm. I want them to shift their understanding of who they are. In Japan, K-12 education, especially high school, especially junior high, not so much in elementary school, it's kind of fun there, but in junior high and high school, things get very regimented. Kids start to wear uniforms, and they're sat in rows, and they have a lot of assignments, and it's a very one-way information deliverance sort of teaching technique. And then they come to AIU, where we want them to be more Socratic, and we want them to ask questions, and we want them to, you know, be involved. And so it's a shift of a paradigm for them. I make it very clear for them. I tell them what they need to succeed at AIU is to become a scholar, not a student. And they usually don't quite know what I mean at the first. They say, what's the difference? And I always tell them, this is the difference. This is basically the line I give them. To me, a student's passive, okay? A student waits for the teacher. That's what they're used to. High school, very much passive. You sit there, you don't ask questions, you write down what the teacher writes on the chalkboard, and that is it. Not very exciting, right? At least for me, it would have been not so great. A scholar is active. A scholar wants to learn. A scholar asks questions. A scholar is involved in the learning process. You know, and we make a big deal of having our young scholars at AIU involved in their learning process. There are lots of group activities, a lot of group assignments, lots of teamwork all the time. You know, and so I tell them I want them to be scholars. I don't want them to be passive. I want them to be like this, involved. And that's important. So this is what I tell them when they arrive. I also like to tell them it's not new. Look, you can probably see this picture. Can you find the students in this picture? Well, there's one kind of asleep in the middle row. Oh, there's one asleep in the back row. And I tell my young scholars, nope, don't be like that. Okay, what's always kind of funny is one kid pointed this out one time to me. If you look at the professor, I think this is Bologna, maybe about 1200. The professor looks like me, you know, he says, with the beard. I tell them I want them to be scholars. I want them to be active. I want them to be involved. I want them to ask questions. It's a paradigm shift for them. And so that's part of this whole alternative assessment strategy, I think, is a paradigm shift for a lot of us, especially the young scholars who are used to like summative tests, and that's it, at least in the context of Japan. But we already know that active versus passive learning, I mean, active learning is more effective for long-term understanding and activating what they're learning. Passive learning, where they memorize, for example, tends to vanish quickly. And Mortimer Adler, who was, you know, part of the, you know, perennialist group of philosophers of education, very conservative, but said, hey, listen, you have to be active. Genuine learning involves activity. And Mortimer was not like a radical. So he said that any learning environment has to have the students active. Otherwise, they will not learn as effectively. So we know it's more effective if people are learning in an active way rather than a passive way. And I talked to them about, like AIU in our situation here. Things are different here. We tell them that when you come to AIU, unlike maybe in your high school in Japan, you will not be doing what is traditional education, which might be, read, test. We tell them that's not what we're looking for. We know that there are different ways that people learn. They read, of course, they hear, they see and hear, but we also talk about discussing with others, experiencing, experiential learning, and teaching, the fact that we will expect them to do research, to learn things, and to share what they've learned. Even at in our foundation program, when they take our foundation English courses, we have them reading books. And then coming in and doing verbal kind of book reports and talking to their peers about the book that they read and telling what they liked about it, what they didn't like, if they could recommend it, all sorts of things, talking about their favorite character. So, I mean, they're teaching, and that's very effective. So we do a lot of presentations, both informal and formal in our system, where people are always reading, researching, doing original research, even on the undergraduate level, working together constantly. I tell them you cannot be shy at AIU. And a lot of this is because what are they going to be involved in life? If they're working for a Japanese company, it will be completely oriented towards the group. They have to be used to working with others, which is kind of ironic because their whole education system was always geared at the individual, and suddenly you go to a company, you got to work together. I think AIU does a good job at getting them ready for that. And even a non-Japanese company, you're always working with other people. You have to be effective at doing that. And we tell them, it's fun. It's not something that just is going to always be work. And we also remind them that, listen, this goes way back. Confucius said, I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand. I think a lot of you as educators might be able to understand what I'm saying. I don't think I understood my content. I went through college, I went through graduate school, and I had a lot of learning about English lit, history. I got into ESL teaching later, but all of that. But I don't think I really understood everything until I started teaching. When I started teaching, I started understanding. It's interesting, isn't it, how that works? Well, we try to do that in the classroom. We try to encourage our kids to share, to teach one another, to do research, to talk about the things they've been reading. Find articles, read the articles, come back and tell us about the articles, all of that. Doing. And we do a lot of project-based learning also at my university, where people go out and they identify issues or problems in the community, and then they try to come up with a creative solution. There's one young lady who went off, there's an orphanage not too far from our university, and she, as an undergraduate, went and did a little project there with the kids, and that's really, she's really gotten into this idea of how to promote these kids' sense of family, even though they're an orphanage. And it's just wonderful. And, so a young scholar, 19 years old, gets excited about this situation where she thinks she can make an impact, learns about it, researches, has some experiences, and comes back and shares excitedly what she's doing, what she's learning. That's real learning. Einstein, who I love for a lot of reasons, including his wonderful hair, which I'm jealous of. He always said, I never teach my pupils, I only provide the conditions in which they can learn. And he was an educator. People forget this. Einstein also was an educator. And so he felt that I don't really teach them, I just make the environment. And they have to explore within that environment. That's how they learn. And he always said he was not terribly successful in traditional education. So I think he was trying to make education a different experience for kids. And also, I always like to end it when I talk to my students about the fact that we should recognize that there are different types of genius. This is Albert Einstein. We don't know if he actually said this, but it's a great quote, you know, where he talks about, listen, if you ask a fish to climb a tree, it will always think it's stupid. I mean, if everything out of high school for me was based on how well I did in mathematics, I would have thought I was the stupidest person on the planet. Fortunately, I was doing well in other things, and so I was able to balance that out. So if we have students and we only test them in one way all the time, and they're just not cognitively conditioned in a way that that works for them, that kid's going to think that they're just no good when it comes to academics. So we need to provide different types of assessments. I had a teacher, I remember this because I don't know, he was kind of a little bit different type of teaching style, and it was a lit class, and he, you know, he was doing this and doing that. But he was the very first one who ever asked me to write a journal, a reading journal. So every week we had to write about what we were reading out of these novels he assigned. And I wasn't at that stage, for a variety of reasons, that emotive in class, you know, where he wanted everybody to kind of like talk. And I did, but it wasn't my thing at that point. But he said in my journal, that I think I found the way that you need to learn. I remember him writing that across the top of the page. He said, this is brilliant. You know? So he was writing about, you know, so he looked forward to getting my journal because he discovered, hey, this is how this kid needs to communicate his learning. Okay, I was doing really well with the journaling. But the other things maybe not so strong. And so anyway, yeah, so if he had just stuck with the tests and the formal papers on the lit, I would have probably not been as successful. But he had this other version of me able to show what I was learning, which was much more personal. And I think that's what I really liked about it, you know, is that I was interacting with the journal, with the literature in a very personal way. So anyway, you know, he discovered a way that I seemed to do better in his class and was happy about that. He was excited about it, actually. And would stop after class and talk to me sometimes, you know, encouraging me. Yeah, I read your journal and great, this idea. He'd encourage me to share sometimes. He'd even sometimes say, oh, I read Pat's journal and he made a point about one of the characters. Pat, could you read that section? And so he tried to even use it to draw me, who I was kind of shy, especially as a freshman, into the discussion more so. So anyway, alternative assessment. Different ways of doing it. So I always tell my students, you are going to be scholars. You know, I don't want you to be passive. I want you to be active. We want you to be a scholar, be involved. And we try to do that at my university. And I know that different cultural environments will have some limitations on what you can and cannot do. Japan, again, it's a very regimented society when it comes to education in the high schools. And so our kids, most of them are Japanese. They come from public schools. And then we're trying to suddenly say, you're going to work together. You're going to ask questions. You're going to debate. You're going to give presentations. It's a big change for them. It's a big change. I talked to them a lot about the hero's journey. And I'm just going to, I don't know, should I show the little video clip? Maybe I will. I hope you can hear this. If you can't, tell me. It's the hero's journey. I share this early on when they join us at AIU because they say it can kind of reflect your learning journey, where you go through and you challenge yourself. For a lot of our kids, of course, are studying in English, content in English. It's a real challenge. And so they should see that as something as part of their hero's journey. Let me share this. I think I have it, so you should be able to hear the sound. If not, somebody tell me that you can't.
What do Harry Potter, Katniss Everdeen, and Frodo all have in common with the heroes of ancient myths? What if I told you they are all variants of the same hero? Do you believe that? Joseph Campbell did. He studied myths from all over the world and published a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, retelling dozens of stories and explaining how each represents the monomyth, or hero's journey. So, what is the hero's journey? Think of it as a cycle. The journey begins and ends in the hero's ordinary world. But the quest passes through an unfamiliar, special world. Along the way, there are some key events. Think about your favorite book or movie. Does it follow this pattern? Status quo, that's where we start. 1 o'clock, call to adventure. The hero receives a mysterious message, an invitation, a challenge. 2 o'clock, assistance. The hero needs some help, probably from someone older, wiser. 3 o'clock, departure. The hero crosses the threshold from his normal, safe home and enters the special world and adventure. We're not in Kansas anymore. 4 o'clock, trials. Being a hero is hard work. Our hero solves a riddle, slays a monster, escapes from a trap. 5 o'clock, approach. It's time to face the biggest ordeal, the hero's worst fear. 6 o'clock, crisis. This is the hero's darkest hour. He faces death and possibly even dies, only to be reborn. 7 o'clock, treasure. As a result, the hero claims some treasure, special recognition, or power. 8 o'clock, result. This can vary between stories. Do the monsters bow down before the hero, or do they chase him as he flees from the special world? 9 o'clock, return. After all that adventure, the hero returns to his ordinary world. 10 o'clock, new life. This quest has changed the hero. He has outgrown his old life. 11 o'clock, resolution. All the tangled plot lines get straightened out. 12 o'clock, status quo, but upgraded to a new level. Nothing is quite the same once you're a hero. Many popular books and movies follow this ancient formula pretty closely, but let's see how well The Hunger Games fits the hero's journey template. When does Katniss Everdeen hear a call to adventure that gets the story moving? When her sister's name is called from the lottery. How about assistance? Is anyone going to help her on her adventure? Hey, Mitch. What about departure? Does she leave her ordinary world? She gets on a train to the capital. Okay, so you get the idea. What do you have in common with Harry Potter, Katniss Everdeen, and Frodo?
All right. So I hope you heard that. But basically, I tell the students they should treat their experience at the university kind of as a hero's journey. That the tests, the assignments, the getting along with the roommate, the dealing with English language day to day, all of these things could be treated as kind of challenges. After each challenge, if you are successful, then it makes you stronger. You can go on. So I think authentic assessment, alternative assessment, I'll call it authentic assessment also, is part of that. So it kind of fits. Now, Wiggins talked about these elements for assessment. I want to talk about, I'm going to use the word authentic now, even though oftentimes it's alternative is, alternative assessment, authentic assessment, kind of the same thing, although people might disagree with me. But look at this. Okay, so it's realistic. It has something to do with reality, with life, with something that beyond the classroom even. It requires judgment and innovation. It asks the students to actually do something. It replaces or stimulates the context in which adults are tested. We are not tested usually as adults by a test, although occasionally, like a driving test or this, you might have to do. But life itself tests us in our learning, in our ability to be flexible, in our ability to take what we've learned over our lifetime and apply it to solving problems or dealing with issues. And it deals with this idea of how people can use their knowledge and skills, maybe to negotiate a complex task. I talked about project-based learning. That would be something where a kid might identify an issue in the community, or maybe like, for example, in Akita, garbage on the beaches in Akita, then how are we going to deal with that? What should we do? What resources do we have to clean up the beach, and how it can happen? I say that because they've been schools that have dealt with those questions with their students in a real way. And it should provide opportunities for kind of rehearse things, practice, consult resources, research, internet, adults, people in the community, get feedback and then refine things. Okay, and it also goes back to what is learning. I think sometimes we have this basic debate: is it memorization, is it application? I think there's a healthy mix of the two, to be honest. You can't get away from not memorizing anything. You need to know some things that are just there, but maybe what's more important is how you apply what you're learning. Nowadays, I mean, when I wanted to learn something, if I had a question, what did I have to do when I was growing up? I went to the library, consulted an encyclopedia. Nowadays, I just Google. So our access to information is much greater and more immediate. So maybe we don't need to memorize as much, but how we apply things is still very important, right? And so I'm going to give you a couple of examples, but first I want to give you this example from a teacher, a math teacher. I chose math specifically because it was math, how he tries to use assessment relative and authentic.
I would prefer you to not take the calculator out of the room thinking, I need to use my calculator, and then leave it on the stairs, and then I cry when I'm like, where's the calculator?
Ben is my math teacher. He immediately made the impression on me that he was funny and that he was eager to teach kids and that he really liked his job. He wants you to really reach and get better at math.
My name is Benjamin Mook. I'm a math teacher at School of the Future. I teach the 7th and 8th grade math cycle. What I'd say is an authentic assessment would be something that a teacher could design to hit the skills and the needs of their population. Some of the things that I'm assessing are not necessarily that kids can get to a right answer, but that kids, once they have that right answer, can understand, I got to this right answer because I followed these steps. I'll just pose questions and try to figure out what common mistakes are. And when I can get a whole mess of like 10 or 15 mistakes that it doesn't even matter who made them. Like I could have a kid that's an A student that has like an error in logic on how to do a certain type of problem. And then I can use that and pose that as a question to students later. So I'll take a mistake that they'll make, and then 1 or 2 days later, I'll throw it back into the class. So what I want you to do is this. Based on the information on this sheet, here you go. One of my more favorite types of assessment is to actually give them incorrect work or incorrect answers and have them break down the error in thought process of how could a student who's not as well educated as you, or throw it out like that, like you would never make this mistake, but somebody did, and how would this mistake happen, and how could you as a classmate or a tutor remediate this mistake? Today, they were applying the slope formula to a set of stairs and seeing if they were in compliance with New York City building codes. Okay, this is the math. This is how the math connects to the real life, and that was my goal.
I really like that we get to use our hands in class and that we really get to experience this in a real life situation, and that it's not just here's the formula, it's like here's why the formula works. And, you know, here's something to prove it, or here's how you could think about it.
Things that I'm doing now, I've designed so that during a class period, the student is working and I am able to walk around and kind of coach them through what they are doing. And so I can look and anticipate the problems they're having. So in the classroom, I'm spending a lot less energy. Like I end the school day now not tired.
When we talk about authentic assessment, obviously things can only be as authentic within the four walls of a school. So we want the tasks that they do to challenge them to synthesize things and to approach problems in the way that a scientist does, or a historian does, or a reader does, or a writer does, and to make those tasks and those challenges as authentic as possible.
And 5 minutes from now, we get back to each other.
I think not only Ben, but the rest of the teachers at SOF and at the school, they really do want you to think about it. And their main goal is not to get you to the right answer, but to show how you got there and show that you really put effort into what you were thinking.
The thing that I find most important is that I'm not assessing my kids to be able to give them a B, C, or D. Like that's not going to help my kids. I would say that the best use of assessment is to figure out where they're at and how I can get them to where I want them to be.
All right. So authentic assessment, I oftentimes talk about it in the context of critical thinking because I think the two kind of go together quite well. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples from my context. And of course, you know, I often tell people if we talk about critical thinking, it comes from two Greek roots, discerning judgment and standards, okay? So discerning judgment based on standards. And that's kind of what we often try to do with our students at AIU, is we want them to be critical thinkers. And of course, it's self-guided, it's self-disciplined thinking. So I think it fits very well with things that we're looking at as far as trying alternative assessments. How can we encourage them to think critically and show us that they're thinking critically? And so, you know, it has all of the elements that we really try to emphasize. We want them to reason, to evaluate, problem solve, to make decisions, to analyze. All of these are skills that they need. And this is, again, examples from my context. So the university, you know, critical thinking, philosophy, I think, often helps us with critical thinking in schools. I even suggested for K-12 education because I think kids can think philosophically at every level if it's coached to them in a way that they can comprehend with language that's simple enough for them. They like ideas. This is the activity I do. I was trying to share the document via the chat function, but for some reason it's not allowing me to do the file. But you did get my PowerPoint, so you have access to this. This is just an example. I teach a unit on educational philosophy, so I want them to understand what the educational philosophies are. I want them to actually be able to articulate, you know, their preferences for different philosophies. So I hand this out, and we, of course, it's part of a unit, so they're getting lots of information, but this is just a broken, kind of a real a skeletonized version of kind of what I do. So I usually start off with a little lecture, and I talk about philosophy and what it is, you know, the level of wisdom. And in common usage, it kind of means general beliefs. And I tell them that everybody has an educational philosophy. And that there are a few that we have identified, but educational philosophies ask six basic questions. These are they. What should be taught? Who should decide what should be taught? Why should this be taught? How should this be taught? What should the teacher do? What should the students do? All educational philosophies have to answer those six questions. If they don't, they're not educational philosophies. Okay, so then I use the examples of perennialism and progressivism because they're kind of some big ones that are often at odds, and I give them kind of some clear contrast. So it's a little bit easier, I think, for them to understand. Of course, Mortimer Adler was a perennialist spokesman. And the idea of perennialism is it's forever, that the ideas that we want to study are the ones that have been with us for centuries. We want to go back to the Greeks and the Romans, and we want, it's a lot of it's the Western canon, but they want old established ideas that have stood the test of time and that should be taught everywhere around the world, so that you are learning the same thing in New York City as you are in Tokyo, as you are in Dhaka, that these ideas are based on the wisdom of the past. And the truth, they felt, is the same for all people, that it has no cultural divisions, that the truth is the truth, regardless of what tradition you have grown up in, and that the same curriculum should be taught to all students. Okay, and again, this is just part of my assignment. I give them a little lecture, and then we go to the assignment, so I'm kind of doing that right now. And then the purpose of the school, place for students to learn what others have created and to use this knowledge in their own lives. They are receptive, although there is a lot of Socratic discussion in the system. So the teacher's role is to impart knowledge. A lot of it's lecturing or providing with readings, etc., and discussion, very teacher-centric. Students must be passive in a way and get information from the teacher. Now that contrasts with Dewey and progressivism. Perfect education prepares students to be lifelong learners. You don't know what they will need to know in 30 years, but you do know that they're going to need to be able to teach themselves and to be flexible in their thinking and creative. So students' interest should guide the teaching. What are the kids interested in? Let that be something you deal with. Now, that's not a new idea. Actually, go back to Aristotle. He said, yes, the students you should pay attention to how students are learning. I'm sorry, it's Plato. Understand what students are interested in, a child is interested in, and then use that to help formulate an educational plan. Teacher is a guide, not the font of all knowledge. Student development should involve the whole student, and parents should be involved in the early grades especially. So a teacher is a facilitator of the students' ideas to explore and make their own investigation. All right, so then I would give them the activity. Have them read through those little blurbs there. I would have them do a Venn diagram. I like infographics, I like graphics. They have to identify points that are unique to perennialism, points that are unique to progressivism, and areas that they share. Okay, I gave them contrast, but what do they share? And then what they have to do is tell me what type of a school would they like to study in and why. If I gave you a choice, a perennialist school or a progressive one, which would you choose? Okay, so I'm keeping them active with this, intellectually engaged, but also making them make decisions and discuss with a partner or a couple of partners what they envision a good school would be. With perennialists or progressive, they will have disagreements. They got to sort it out. Okay, so critical and active thinking, I mean, we can go way back to Voltaire, which said no problem can withstand the assault of sustained thinking. And if there's a life skill anyone on the planet needed, according to Josh Lanyon, it was the ability to think with creative, critical objectivity. Another example from my context is this. We created a book, actually Miguel Sosa Sensei, a colleague of mine, was tasked with creating a liberal arts reader because we are a liberal arts university. We wanted students to understand the liberal arts. So they have a book that they have to read. We have workshops, but their final objective, their assessment, is to actually do a poster presentation where we want them to select a quote from the reading or a poem, because we intersperse poetry in there too, and relate it to their experiences at AIU. Okay, so they take a poem and then they have to, or a quote, and then they have to do these things. Tell us why they selected it, what they think this quote or poem means in terms of liberal arts education in general, how the information in the quote or poem applies to their experience at AIU, and what they think, because they do it as a group, this quote or poem means in terms of their futures. Okay, then I give them some information, 2 A3 size sheets, 2 to 3 people, 5 to 7 minutes. Student Hall is this huge auditorium, and then, you know, talk about the grading. And then they do it. All right, they do it. And things like this. And then I have examples from students. Another example here would be from when I worked in the Middle East. I had something I called Tell Me About Your Country, where I wanted kids to involve themselves in their culture. And one of them was this idea of being a tour guide, okay? And you have to explain a cultural event or item or tradition and then write a short paragraph about it. And a lot of the kids would talk about iftar. Okay, remember to mute your microphone, please. Okay, so iftar, I think everyone knows what that is, but I would kind of give the background here. Okay, this is what the students would talk about. They would explain what iftar was, rules and regulations of it, of Ramadan, and then they would talk about the evening meal after the sun went down. And would talk about the different ways around the world that people celebrate their iftar, some by communities, even how fast food restaurants have kind of gotten into it a bit. And then, you know, I gave them an example here. Okay, iftar, Ramadan, family home, da-da, and they explain it like a tour guide would. That would be one example. And then I would have them, like, for example, maybe if they're in Japan, they would select something from Japanese culture and do it. Another example is this one. This was actually a board game that was created by a class. I told a class a few years ago, this goes way back, I think back in like 2009, maybe 2008. And I told them I wanted you to create a board game or a game that would celebrate and explain Japanese culture. I was doing this when I was in Japan. And they did. And so they created a board game with questions, and they had cards that, you know, you select a card, you have to do things, you would use die. And they had little markers. At some points, they'd have to do something like make an origami crane, things like that. And again, this was student generated. I told them I wanted to make a game, and kids came up with different games to celebrate Japanese culture. And it was great fun, and they also learned quite a bit. And because this was an English class, they had to do things in English also. And so they were kind of involving themselves in the language, in the culture, and kind of being creative. And then there's another project that was in the Middle East. And basically, I got a grant to create a textbook that would feature Emirati culture. So the government gave us a grant. We used students. What they did was they would interview people, elders in the community. And they would take those stories, and we would create them into a textbook that was then sent around to students at the high school level throughout the Emirates. Hundreds of copies, actually. And then we even had CDs that we could send out to them. Thousands of copies, and then CDs. And then they had 12 biographies. They had information about Emirati culture. They had photographs around the Emirates. They had quotes from Sheikh Zayed, who was the founding president of the Emirates. And we put it into a book, also a digital book on a CD, and it became part of the curriculum in the country. Students did this, of course, working with teachers. So these were college students doing this, getting the interviews, helping to write up the biographies in English, helping to write questions, helping to write vocabulary assignments, and then sharing that with younger Emiratis. And I just kind of like one of my favorites is The Watermelon Thieves, and it just gives you an idea, just a few paragraphs here, very simple. We basically Fletch Kincaded this down to a junior high level. And talks about a guy who was, when he was a young child, he got caught stealing a watermelon with a few friends. You know, kind of an embarrassing story, but he said he learned a lot. So the police actually put him in jail cell for a little bit to teach him a lesson. They were very young, like elementary age kids. And then the vocabulary section, they would have a did you pay attention section, a history culture question, and a chance for students to write or talk about him or herself. This was a project done by university students. I ran it, yes, with a team of editors and professors, but the students created the book. And then the book became part of the curriculum in the Emirates. That's pretty powerful, okay? So authentic assessment is basically have these possibilities, but there are dozens of possibilities you can come up with. But, you know, problem solving, PBL learning, having portfolios, for example, writing a how-to manual, doing interviews, writing articles. Okay, could you make sure you mute your microphone, please? Writing summaries. I like to use mind maps and graphics. I like to use presentations, okay? You can come up with a lot of different things, you know, education, maybe create a classroom management plan, maybe nursing, assess a mock students' patient's health, business. They've got dozens and dozens of ideas that you can access online. If you put in authentic assessment, alternative assessment, and then put in your content area, you will have things come up. But how do you do this? First thing you got to do is identify your objectives. What do you want them to learn or do? Define the tasks. You know, what do they have to actually do to kind of fulfill the objectives? Establish a performance criteria. How will they show you that they've accomplished the task? And then rubrics are vital in this. And I know writing rubrics is difficult, but this is a rubric that I had for the poster presentation, right? So it dealt with organization, language use, stage presence, visuals, and the content. And, you know, I went through this ahead of time with the students so they understood, and then I marked them based on this rubric. And there are advantages and disadvantages, okay? So the advantages might be that they provide a means of assessing valued skills that cannot be directly assessed in traditional testing environments. They provide a more realistic setting for student performance than traditional tests. They focus on student performance and the quality of work performed by the students. So, you know, how can they do things? How are they doing things? They can be easily aligned with established learning outcomes. But there are disadvantages, and that's why I say you will probably use a mix of some alternative assessments, keeping some of the tests that you have to do, the summative ones, final exams, final projects. A lot of these things will still be there, but this can be a complement. And then the process can be costly in terms of time, effort, equipment. It does take time to do this, all right? That's a disadvantage. And you have to come up with a rubric probably, and you have to explain to people how you'll be marking them on this. But it doesn't always need to be marked either. Sometimes it can just be something you do to help students understand where they are. And so authentic assessment, to recap, is the idea of using creative learning experiences to test student skills and knowledge in realistic situations. Okay, now I'm looking at my clock, and I think I'm about out of time, even though I have a little bit more I could do. So I'm going to run through this section relatively quickly. You will have access to the PowerPoint. I will also be available to answer questions both now and in the future. But these are classroom assessment techniques are actually very simple little tiny things you can do to kind of check up on how your students are doing. They're not assessments in the traditional way of like, oh, you're going to get an A, a B, a C, a D, or in Japan, a 5, a 4, a 3, a 2, a 1. And they kind of go through this idea of stress and the fact that some stress is good, as Yerkes-Dobson's law says. Too much stress, however, causes problems. So how do you deal with student stress? And we talked about in my earlier session about how the student needs to know that you're paying attention to them, that you are aware of them, that you are concerned about them. So usually for students, confusion is a big issue, right? They're not understanding, so they're getting a little worried that they're not going to succeed in the course, and then it snowballs if they don't ask questions, and they might have a lack of clarity. I remember, you know, in my own experience in college, occasionally kids crying because they didn't get something, and, you know, they weren't the type who were going to go ask for help or ask questions, and they were just all stressed. So the central idea with these classroom assessment techniques is it gives you a chance to quickly gather information, all right? And it's an approach and a technique. And the idea is that the more you know about how your students are learning, the better you can adjust your teaching to help them learn more. And it's a technique. It's simple, non-graded, occasionally anonymous in-class activities. That's all it is, okay? And it's aimed at course improvement rather than doing some sort of a grading scheme on the students. So you're just trying to improve the class and the experience for the students. So that's what these are meant to do. And Angela and Cross, who kind of came up with the term back in the 90s, you know, they emphasize that these are simple things. And how they did this was they interviewed dozens of professors in the United States and asked them, how do you judge if your students are understanding things without giving them a test, without giving them a high-stakes test? Are there techniques you use? And they came up with dozens of these because everybody has a trick or two, right? And so you need to decide what you want to learn. You choose a classroom assessment technique that might give you that information. You explain the purpose of the activity. Then after class, you review the results and decide what changes, if any, to make. And then you let the students know. That's important, the feedback. So, you know, it gives you feedback on how your kids are doing, gives you some useful information. It gives them it fosters a good rapport because the students know you care. You know, you're not just throwing things at them, sink or swim. You want them to swim. And it encourages this idea in the student's mind that education and teaching is formative. You know, it's powerful thing for a kid to understand that the teacher is involved in a process and they're adjusting it as they go, diagnosing, figuring things out, that it's a very dynamic sort of process, teaching and learning. And for the students, it helps them monitor their own learning. It breaks down feelings of anonymity, maybe helps them improve their study skills by pointing out issues they might have. It provides concrete evidence that the teacher cares about their learning, and it gives them a degree of input in the class. That's powerful too. I have used primarily out of the dozens, maybe 10 different examples. And I'm gonna just focus in on one that I use a lot, the muddiest point. And I'm going to see after I close the screen here, if I can share this with you. If not, don't worry, you will be able to access it through BIL. But these are the 10 that I use the most frequently, and there are dozens more that you can access online now. Just put in classroom assessment techniques into Google and you will get a lot of examples. So I also use a one-sentence summary. It enables teachers to find out concisely, completely, and creatively how students can summarize a large amount of information on a topic. Okay, so let me go back here. I want to talk about the muddiest point. It's very simple. At the end of a class, I ask students, and I now use the chat function a lot, is there anything that was unclear? Anything that you did not understand in the class that you want me to be aware of, that maybe I can answer the question directly or come back to it the next class and clarify things? And now in Japan, I find it very powerful if you get kids into groups. So I often do this with breakout rooms. I say, okay, get together in your breakout room. Identify any issue you have, something you don't understand. And what's powerful is in the breakout room, oftentimes students help each other. And some kid might not understand something, and some kid will say, oh, this is what the professor meant. But then when they come back, if they do have something, they can chat it to me. So it's anonymous in a way to their fellows. I can see it and I can then say, okay, this was the question. If I'm not ready to answer it right away, I'll say I'll come back to it the next class. Okay, now we're not going to be able to go through this, but the one-sentence summary is kind of the same thing where you ask a kid, and I use it this way. I tell them, okay, pretend you are jogging down the hallway and your friend is jogging past you, going the opposite direction. And your friend yells out, what did you learn in Dr. Pat's class today? So in that jog, you have to tell him or her in just a few seconds, one sentence basically, what you learned. And I put them out in groups, they figure it out, and they come together and they share their sentence. It tells me if they understand. And I'm not really going to go through this because we're running out of time, but just so you know, the sentence could be, like if I have to summarize, okay, what is CATS? One sentence summary. Teachers assess their students' learning regularly during the semester in their own classrooms by using classroom assessment techniques and any other appropriate tools and methods of inquiry so that they can understand and improve teaching effectiveness and the quality of student learning. That's my one-sentence summary for classroom assessment techniques. Okay, so today I need to wrap up. We reviewed changes to our teaching environment and what it means for assessment. We reviewed the importance of active learning. We reviewed types of alternative, authentic assessment. We went through methods of assessing, understanding, and clarity via classroom assessment techniques. That's what we did. Now, at this point, I would like to, these are my references, remind you that we will have another session in January on the 9th, and you'll be informed of this. Going further, we'll have a few workshops. I'll also talk about getting published. I'm an editor of a journal, as well as on the editing board of several journals, so I can often offer people some advice about getting published, which is important if you're in academia, if you're at the university level especially. Okay, let me stop sharing. And let me see if I can share my, and at this point, I know that we're really out of time, but I would like to ask if there are any questions that you might have. Okay, there are classroom assessment techniques. Managed to share that. And I'm going to share one other document if I can find it. Let me see, it's on critical thinking. Here, okay. There we go. Oh, now that's disconnected, but you got the classroom assessments at least. Okay, listen. Oh, I see one more person needs to be admitted. Do I have any questions? I know that I run through a lot with you. For you this morning, a lot of you in Bangladesh, for me this afternoon here in Japan, and people different places around the clock in different locations. This is being recorded. It will be provided through BIL's system, though, so you can come back and watch it again, both sessions. I provided you the PowerPoints. I provided you the handouts. I'm also going to send these along to BIL and BRAC University so they can distribute these in the future. All the information I've shared is public access. I don't want to hold any proprietary control of anything. I believe that we have to help each other as teachers. That's important. Actually, I always like to tell people when I go into a school, whether it be a high school, elementary school, junior high, or university, the first thing I ask the faculty is to tell me how many years each of them have worked. Okay, now at AIU, we have about 100 faculty members. And I showed them that they had well over 1,000 years of teaching experience among everybody. And so just like Voltaire, I tell them that, listen, if you have a problem in your classroom, if there's an issue on the campus, if there's something going on, 1,000 years of teaching experience will probably be able to find an answer if we work together. Okay, so think about problems as a group, dialogue, talk, support each other. These are vital things. When I first started teaching as a high school teacher, tragic thing was I was very much alone. I mean, I would go to the classroom, I would do my thing, and I didn't have a chance to talk to anybody else about the teaching. A few years in, I was invited to join this kind of, we called it an enclave, where we had a English teacher, social studies teacher, and science teacher, and reading teacher all working together with one group of kids, as part of our idea of trying to provide and form a sense of community in that inner city school. And so, then I got a chance to see people teaching, not just my own subject, but other subjects. It was very powerful. So, and then I started talking to people about teaching. And, so don't, if you're having issues, reach out to faculty members in your institution, ask questions, seek help. And if people ask you questions or seek your help, find some time to help them. I mean, we need to work together. I've emphasized that with my faculty all the time, but especially this last semester with online education, we really needed to come together as a faculty and have FD sessions, faculty development sessions, share information about our teaching, about our techniques, help each other out. That's vital. Okay, do I have any questions? Okay.
Dr. Patrick, Mamuni again, just one last question.
All right,
Since you teach internationally and you have taught in different countries or around the world, so in BRAC University, we are admitting a lot of international students.
Yes.
So my question to you is how you prepare yourself to address the issue of cultural diversity in your classroom?
Okay, well, the first thing that I do is I need to do my homework, which means I need to learn about my students. Now, I encourage them to teach me about their cultures. That's why I have these icebreakers, like the, Pechakucha about myself, where students can talk about where they come from, their experiences growing up, maybe what their educational environment was. So that's important that I have those icebreakers there and that I pay attention to what the kids are saying. So that's part of it. And then, so the icebreakers become a quick window into the minds and hearts of my students. So I make sure that I have icebreakers like that so I can learn a lot. If I have the luxury of time and I kind of know something about, I get my course lists of students who's going to be in it. And in AIU, they often will tell you international student from Bulgaria, international student from France, international student from Ireland, international student from Indonesia. So I have a little bit of time, a small window, where I can say, okay, I've got these kids from different places. So I try to familiarize myself, remind myself of maybe cultural differences in educational environments. If kids come out of Europe, kids come out of North America, they're going to expect to have debates and discussions in their class, right? If I have a lot of kids from Asia, they will probably understand that they need to have debates and discussions, but might not be comfortable with that environment. So I might need to kind of be aware of that and kind of edge people into it slowly. At the same time, I'll tell my North American students, shall we say, that listen, we need to be aware that, you know, people are coming out of cultures that might be very teacher-centric and they might not be used to class discussion. So we're going to be gentle, understanding, sympathetic, and give people opportunities to speak. They might need to be invited rather than just, you know, an American kid tends to jump up and say, I got this I want to say. Japanese kid might wait to be invited in by the teacher. So there, I do come up with techniques to try to deal with that. Sometimes I get them into small groups to discuss first, then we come back together. And some of this is also language. The kids who English is a strong but still a second language might need a little bit of time to get their English brain working so they can kind of get their vocabulary together to express themselves, whereas my kids who are native speakers of English don't need that time. They can just jump in. So I do try to structure the activity to allow the different types of cultural, linguistic environments that these kids have come from to not be a detriment, shall we say, but be a positive, that, you know, we all kind of respect each other's cultural differences. But I have to do my homework, right? And I have to have those icebreakers, and I have to pay attention when the kids are in the icebreakers and talking about their backgrounds and what their hopes and fears are and what their, you know, their personal inventory is and all of that. So that's a key. I hope that helped with the answer. Do we have other questions? Any other questions? Okay. Oh, let me see. Do you have any suggestions? Oh, here are a couple questions. Do you have any suggestions to create an effective instructor? Okay, well, we had that one already. All right, I've got that one. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions popping up. I do recognize we're over time, so I don't want to hold people. I know you might have other schedules you've got to honor, but if we have, I'll just open it up for a minute or two. If I don't hear any questions, no problem. I will actually hang out a little bit after the session. So if you're a bit shy, you can have a chance to maybe talk to me without so many people in this Zoom room, okay? But do I have any questions right now from anybody that wants to ask? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So listen, I want to say this. I want to say that first off, thank you to BRAC University and to BIL for the invitation. Thank you all for sharing this morning or afternoon with me in this Zoom session. I do appreciate the fact that everybody's busy, and so I'm very happy that you were able to take some time to join us. And I hope learn from what I've shared today. So thank you. Thank you for everyone who's organized. Yes.
And thank you, Patrick. This was very, very enlightening. All your experiences of all these years, and over 30 years of experiences, and all your, it has been very, very worldwide, a global experience that you have shared with us. And I'm pretty sure, especially as Mamoun said, that we are already having a lot of international students, and we are continuously having to deal with them, and especially with this online situation, things have gotten very, very difficult for a lot of people. Although the distance have sort of dissolved and it doesn't matter anymore, but other things have popped up, and that has been very, very difficult. So thank you very much, and we are very, very grateful to you for this session. We hopefully will be meeting again on January with the other topics. So Apa, would you like to say a few words? Lady Abid.
Yes, Patrick, thank you so much. This was really enlightening, and I was happy to understand and feel that, you know, much of some of the things that you have mentioned here are already practiced by BIL, which is very good. But there are a lot of things that we have learned today, which I hope that we will be able to discuss and implement those things also.
Yes.
And I'm looking forward to the next session that you will have. And I want to thank everybody who joined our session today. And I hope to see you all in the next session in January. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you.
And I'm going to, like I said, I'll keep the session open. So as people leave, if you have a question you want to address to me, I'll just stay here for about another 10 minutes, just in case. Otherwise, everyone, thank you very much. And please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick, I have one question.
Sure.
We have students from Africa, and they have a different kind of dialect. And it is very difficult for our teachers to understand, and it is very difficult for them to understand our teachers.
Yes.
So what should we do here?
Well, you know, that just takes patience. We have two students from Africa who are degree-seeking students at our university. They are scholarship students who joined us, and I love their accents. I mean, to me, it's almost like poetry, like music. I think it's very beautiful, but some of that just takes patience and attunement. And we're constantly in those situations where we need to kind of encounter a student's accent as they're learning a language, for example, and trying to understand. And there's no clear way to do it other than through a patience. And the student has to be, if you're constantly telling them, oh, I don't understand you, they'll probably stop talking. But you can tell them, oh, what did you say there? That was interesting. Could you repeat? And also a lot of times we'll have them write things out too. So we're reading rather than listening. And so that helps also, but it's just a quiet, patient process of being welcoming and paying attention and asking questions. Sometimes idiomatic expressions are wonderful, so I often will ask them, "Oh, that's kind of an interesting way of saying that. Can you tell me that again?" And then I get them to tell me about the idiom, and they talk about, "Oh, this is from where I grew up in Kenya, and we say it this way." And so you just have to be patient. There's no clear, defined way to get it, but ask questions, ask them to repeat, welcome them. If you hear something interesting or beautiful in the way they phrase things, ask them about that. I had one person years ago, I was teaching a young man from Pakistan, and he one time told me, his friend, they were having a discussion about something, and the fellow made a mistake, his friend made a mistake about, I will do something on January. And this fellow said to him, he said, "Oh, no, a month is not a horse. You cannot ride it." And I thought that was the most clever way of expressing it. And I would have never, and I asked him, "Oh, that's interesting." They said, "Oh, it's actually from the Pakistani language, but I just translated it into English." And I thought, "Oh, that's great." So we talk about it. And we should also celebrate. I like to tell people this, and of course, I'm a native speaker of English. I speak American Midwestern English. But I tell people that we should celebrate the diversity in the language. I mean, English is an international language. People speak it in all parts of the world for varieties of reasons. And those varieties, I think, make things beautiful. When I read literature, I like to read, idiomatic expressions from the local cultures and things. So I think all that, to me, I love it. I deal with linguistics, so maybe that's one reason. So we shouldn't think that everybody has to be in a certain box of you pronounce things this way and this is the right vocabulary for this situation. As long as we can be understanding, that I can understand what somebody's telling me and they can understand what I am saying, that's the goal. And so, let's enjoy the differences in the way people pronounce and express and idiomatic expressions. I think to me, it's a beautiful mosaic of language. So that's what I like. And I have friends like at AIU, my colleagues, I have friends from colleagues I work with from New Zealand, from the United States, from Australia, from Colombia, from Canada, from, you know, England, and everybody pronounces and expresses things differently, and we have different accents, but we understand each other. And if I hear a phrase that I think is kind of interesting, I'll stop my colleague and say, can you tell me that again? What does that mean in the Australian context? And they'll say, oh yeah, well, what did I learn not too long ago? Swish. Somebody said, oh, you know, your suit looks swish. And I kind of understood from the context. And this was an Australian, so I asked, well, what do you mean? Well, we say swish to mean like, oh, you look elegant, you know, your suit and tie, you look elegant. And so now I know a new phrase, and it's kind of neat. I can say, oh, that's swish. So I like that. I like collecting all of these things. And so I guess we should just celebrate it whenever possible. But going back to the issue, patience, understanding, being willing to ask questions, being welcoming, so nobody's ridiculed for not speaking English one way, you know, a certain way. I think that's important. And so, yeah, I would just say those things and just encourage everybody to be open, enjoy the differences when you can, aim for understanding, and that's the main point of it. So that's what I can say.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right.
Can I?
Yes, go ahead.
This is Pankaj from BIL. I have a question that,
sure.
As you know that when we think about the test or assessment, we have to think about what the reliability of the test score, whether this score actually represents the student's actual ability or not.
Yes.
So, but one of the challenges that we face is like when we go for alternative assessment or when we go for collaborative teaching and learning, when we give students the teamwork, group work, or assignment where they have to write different parts together, they have to give feedback to one another. So what happens is like we assess the student based on the final final product or based on the final write-up, and where probably everyone tends to get the same mark. So one challenge is like that same mark,
maintaining that reliability.
that final mark might not often represent the student's individual true ability. So what is your suggestion in that case, and how can we?
Well, we do a lot of writing, of course, in the liberal arts, and so our writing programs are, you know, very keen on improving that. And it used to be a situation where students were marked on their final product only, the final paper, you know, the essay. They handed it in and teachers checked it, and it tended to be pretty good. But we started to break things down, and so we decided, okay, rather than just mark the final essay, we're going to mark the draft, we're going to mark the lit review. So we decided to break down the process, and the students would be, and I won't say judged, but their work was looked at different stages of the writing process. Like their outline, they come out with an outline for an essay, their thesis itself, and all of these things. So we basically kind of elongated the process. It was more work because teachers had to look at more papers, but the fact that the students were being paid attention to, when I was in college, when I was in high school, to be honest, I was never ever graded on anything other than the final product, the final paper. And I think that I didn't really understand how to write. It was a long process for me to learn how to write academically. And I think if they had broken down the system more,
please mute yourselves.
Yeah, if they had broken down the system, you know, so that somebody was looking at my outline, looking at my thesis statement, looking at, you know, my first draft, my second draft, as well as the final copy, I think I would have made far more progress quicker as a writer. So that is one thing that we're, you know, the summative assessment where it's at the very end and then they just show you what they learned might not be the most effective way to do it. Some teachers adapt systems where I did this when I was a high school teacher, and it was actually pretty effective, realizing that the group of kids I was working with, they had very low scores for reading, and they had a lot of anxiety about academics. School was not always a welcoming place for them. So what I did was I gave them a series of quizzes throughout the term. And those quizzes, those questions, would actually, 5 questions here, 5 questions there. I would gather those, and I told them that I would take all of their midterm questions for their midterm examination and for their final examination out of these quizzes. And the quiz questions actually came from questions I was asking in the class itself. And so if students paid attention and they kept all of their quiz papers, and teaching them organization was part of the life skill I was working with there, they knew that they were going to have all of the answers to all of the questions right there if they paid attention. And so these little quizzes would lead into the final exam, and the midterm and the final exam. So I told them at the final exam, none of the questions were new. You've seen these several times. And so it gave them a bit of confidence. It also, I think, helped them when they were trying to get through the reading, which reading was always a challenge for these kids, right? In the inner city school that I was working in. And I think that that helped them. So, rather than maybe even throwing questions like as a final exam at them, you can actually build up to it through a series of smaller quizzes and assignments. And then those lead into the final exam so that they don't encounter new questions for that final exam. They're just reflecting on things they've been learning all the way along. That might help. It helped when I was dealing with high school kids. I've done that here or there in university teaching, and I think it can be very effective if you're trying to cover complex content with students. That's challenging their language ability and acuity and everything else along with it. So that's a suggestion. Just one of probably many. Okay. Any other questions? Otherwise, I will probably have to close the session. I know we're a half an hour over, which is fine. I enjoy talking to all of you, but I do recognize you need to probably be on your way for the rest of your day. Okay. All right. Listen, I hope that you can join the next session in January. Please recognize that I'm going to write something here. This is my, of course, Brack has this information already. Make sure I didn't miss any, spell it. And I'm going to send this to everyone in the meeting. That's my email address, my work email address. So if you do have questions that pop up or suggestions or want to make a comment, please just feel free to email me. I'll try to get to I get about 80 emails a day from students and everybody, but I'm pretty good at getting to all of the emails and responding, and I'd be happy to hear from you. So if you have questions, comments, something you want to share, please, I'm only an email away, okay? All right, well, at this point, I'm going to thank you again. Again, thank you, Brack University. Thank you, BIL. Thank you for organizing this. I know it took a lot of effort to get everything organized and advertised and structured, and I'm deeply appreciative of everyone who was involved. And if I listed all the names, we'd be here for another hour probably. So thank you. You're all in my heart, and I thank you very much for that. So thank you, and I'm going to close the session, okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Bye.
Have a good day yourself. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.